Welcome. I'm so excited that you're all here. As you all know, food waste reduction and recycling is really important, especially as I want to say we're going into more climate change, but it's here. We all know that climate change is an issue, and then also costs are rising, and you'll learn today that by composting you save a lot of money as an individual and as a municipality. My name is Lisa Pratt, and I'm on the Kennebunk Select Board. I moved here from a community that composted, and not only did they compost, it was required by law. And so when I moved here, it was kind of a shock. So I was really excited when a resident mentioned to me the work that the Mitchell Center was doing, and I jumped right on board and said, what can we do to bring composting to Kennebunk, because it is so important. I just wanted to let you know what our agenda for today is. I printed it out, but I forgot it, of course. But Mark King from the Maine DEP, he is going to speak today about organics recovery, keys to promoting organics recovery programs through Maine's food recovery hierarchy. And then he's going to speak about part 2, how to set up a consolidated collection center, which I think is really important. And then Suzanne Lee from the Mitchell Center is going to speak about using a team approach to develop community-based food scrap collection and utilization. Then the best part is break, morning snack. And then Lisa Pellegrino from CET is going to present mainly on what businesses can do to compost. And then we are going to have the Maine DEP management team speak about navigating the regulations surrounding organic recovery programs. And then Mark Hedrick is going to speak about opportunities for on-farm use of collected organics. And then hopefully afterwards we'll have a good discussion and kind of figure out what our next steps are going to be. I just wanted to put a couple shout out thank yous. Obviously thank you to all of our presenters for being here. I really appreciate it. I also wanted to thank all of the town staff that's helped me out, especially Tina Riddell, Kathy Nolet, and Kim Carter. And thank you to Linda Miller-Cleary, one of our residents, for helping get the word out to some businesses in town. And then I wanted to give a big thank you to Boulangerie, a local bakery in town, that helped us with our compostable boxed water, and the Maine Crisp Company that provided morning snack. And I just wanted to introduce Brian LeVerriere, who is our Director of Public Works. And thank you, Brian, for supporting this initiative. And then finally, before I do my finally, I just wanted to let everyone know that we are doing a community composting workshop with Mark King and the Kennebunk Free Library on October 3rd at 6 p.m. And that'll be for residents to come and learn more about composting and what they can do at home. So that'll be sort of our next step after we learn about what municipalities and businesses can do.
Via Zoom.
Mark will be via Zoom, but we will all be at the library in person, and we're going to have a great discussion and an ice cream party afterwards.
I'll virtually enjoy that. I'll eat your share.
Yeah. And then, so lastly, I just wanted to introduce our Kennebunk Town Manager, Mike Pardue, and he's going to say a couple words.
Thank you, Lisa. I'll use my stage voice. This all started because of a vision Lisa had in her background and experience out where she moved from, and some of the requirements that she alluded to. Like Lisa, I echo thank you to all the town staff that helped put this all together. Thank you to our state personnel, our partners that are here to help us today. And most importantly, welcome to all of you. I think this will be a great forum, and a lot of good work went into this. You will see today, behind me, Congresswoman Shelley Pingree was not able to attend. She was invited. She was very gracious, so she'll kick us off this morning with regards to some of her thoughts about what we're doing. And that'll either be Tina, who will make that work, or Brian. I have no clue. But welcome. If you need anything, please let us know. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Congresswoman Shelley Pingree. I'm pleased to join you virtually today to talk about the importance of reducing food waste and fighting climate change. And most importantly, to share some updates from Washington about how we're addressing these issues in Congress. First, I'd like to thank the Kennebunk Department of Public Services, the Maine Department of Environmental Protection, the Maine Department of Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry, and the University of Maine Mitchell Center for Sustainable Solutions for holding this workshop. It will take all of us to end waste and hunger and mitigate climate change. You are all vital partners in educating our communities and encouraging action at the local level. We're all aware of the sobering statistics. 1 in 5 children in Maine go hungry. Yet approximately 30 to 40% of our domestic food supply never makes it to the table and instead ends up in landfills. The issue of food loss is multifold. It is a waste of labor, a waste of energy, and a waste of water. And when it ends up in our landfills, it is a major contributor to the greenhouse gas emissions that drive the climate crisis. The Environmental Protection Agency found that food waste makes up the largest percentage of material landfilled and incarcerated in the United States. This is not a partisan issue on any level. My colleagues in the House and the Senate on both sides of the aisle are concerned about food waste, hunger, and climate change. As a member of both the House Appropriations Subcommittee on Agriculture and the House Agriculture Committee, I'm fighting for a food system that works better for farmers, consumers, and the environment. Legislative solutions could have a major impact on food waste and fighting climate change. I've championed a number of bipartisan bills to address this issue, like standardizing and clarifying confusing food date labeling language, which is a huge factor in food waste. People are throwing away perfectly good food because they think their food is expired. And tackling food waste in school by providing dedicated grants for schools to conduct food waste audits and implement waste reduction programming. I'm going to be pushing for the comprehensive provisions to prevent food waste outlined in my bills to be included in the next Farm Bill, which my colleagues and I are gearing up for right now. I've also introduced the Agriculture Resilience Act, which sets a roadmap to achieve net zero emissions from agriculture by 2040 and empowers farmers with the tools and resources needed to improve soil health, sequester carbon, reduce emissions, enhance their resilience, tap into new market opportunities, and tackle food waste. As you can see, there are many ways to address food waste and climate change, but stemming the tide is critical. That's where all of you come in. I take comfort in knowing that there are dedicated people like you in Maine who are working to create a sustainable and habitable future. This is not a problem easily resolved, and I assure you, you're not alone in this fight. Thank you again for being partners in this work. Take care.
Addressing the loss of food and trying to move it further to higher and better uses. And I'll talk about the program as a whole at 30,000 feet, and then I'll focus in the next talk on the consolidated collection method and how it came about doing that. So first of all, what's really important to know, and this is a number that we've used for many years, and until more specific data comes out, we keep using it. Every resident in the state of Maine wastes approximately 150 to 200 pounds of food a year. So if you think about our population, about 1.3 million, that's quite a lot of food that's being wasted. And that's all food that could go to higher and better uses and not end up in our landfills where it creates a lot of really nasty leachate that has to be treated, and a lot of greenhouse gases such as methane and nitrous oxide, which are 25 to 300 times more potent than carbon dioxide. And so we really try to focus on all those things when we look at it. And it is definitely about 28 to 40% of our waste stream. We had a study done in 2011 that kind of validated that. And so we're trying just as much as we can to get that moving in a different direction. And as a result, we will eventually reach that 50%, if not 60% goal of recycling in the state of Maine. So it's really a good thing for us. So this is Maine's food recovery hierarchy. This was adopted in 2016 by the legislature. It differs from the EPA in that we put composting and digestion on the same level. We believe they both have equal value. But the way that it works is it's an upside down pyramid. If you look at the very top, it says reduce unwanted food waste. It means basically source reduction. Don't produce any waste to begin with. And that's basically by shopping smart, using leftovers first, preparing just enough meals for the number of people coming instead of that extra 20 or 30% that buffets do just in case. And that way that food is not wasted. When you can't do that, then we want to see it go to hungry people. Maine has some pretty scary statistics. 1 in 8 people, 1 in 6 children face hunger in Maine, and that's a really big deal. We're like one of the top states that has major insecurity when it comes to food. And we need to stop that, we need to focus on that. There's a group called ReFed, which specifically looks at harvesting food from buffets and other types of activities and getting it while it's still warm to hungry people. Maine has really had an issue with that in the past, but we're starting to see a lot of change and more acceptance. And hopefully in the next 5-6 years, we'll be able to go to a buffet, clean out all the food that's left over, and bring it to a homeless shelter and feed people right away. It's just a smart thing to do. Because when that ends up in the trash, it's just a waste for everybody. So source reduction is starting to look at that whole concept of just not wasting to begin with. And there was a phrase, I had a boss who used this phrase all the time, I really liked it. It was, use it up, wear it out, make it do or do without. And the idea, when I was a kid, I had an older brother, and I wore a lot of his clothes when we outgrew them. And that mentality is not being used today. If you tell a sibling of another child that you've got to wear his clothes till they're all worn out, they're going to be like, there's no way. I'm not wearing hand-me-downs. I want fresh stuff because I got to be cool when I go to school. And so that mentality has been lost in this new world, and we just want to get people back to that. This is another thing. Hannaford and Shaw's get a lot of kudos because they've done this, where you take food that's not necessarily beautiful, but still edible, and you put it for sale a little bit less money. We call it the ugly food. And the idea is that people need to understand that the wrapper isn't as important as what's inside. And that's just one more opportunity not to waste food. As far as feeding hungry people, Maine really does a good job. The problem is that we're so disparate in population. We've got Good Shepherd doing a great job for the Auburn, sort of central Maine area, and down in Portland. And then we've got up in the county, we've got, Dixie Shaw doing her thing. But in between, there's not a lot. So we just need to have a better food, recycling food donation network to get it to hungry people. As far as animals go, the #1 target is hops and grains from breweries. They make great supplemental animal feed. But another one is the fresh produce from the pre-consumer side at a lot of the restaurants and grocery stores. That becomes a really great resource as well. So identifying those outlets and getting them to farms is one of the main goals of our program. There's several ways to deal with food. Once you can't put it in the feed chain, what do we do with it before it goes to landfill? And our two options that are really popular are anaerobic digestion, of which we have basically 2 facilities currently doing it. One is an on-farm that does predominantly organics up in Exeter, Maine. It's called AgriCycles in Business. And then we also have Lewiston Auburn Water Pollution Control Authority has a digester of sludge. But in order to make that digester happy, they feed her organics as well to keep it a balanced diet. So those work pretty good. But we also have compost facilities located throughout the state, and we're trying to develop more and more as we go. You'll learn about consolidated collection in a minute, and then you'll learn about on-farm opportunities from Mark Hedrick later today of ways we can get food to places where it can be used to make compost. The benefit of compost is that nutrients that are generated in one community stay within the same zip code. They get used in the local soils, they make the soils healthy, stronger, more vital, and more specifically, we're facing lots of drought these last couple of years. They hold on to water and make it available to the plants longer in the season, so you see less drought issues on farms that have used compost. So it becomes kind of a neat thing. We also have had in the past, not as much nowadays, but back in the late 90s, Cherry Field Foods over in Ellsworth used to actually land up buy their frozen vegetables that didn't quite make it in storage, and then they turn it into the soil, and that became feed for the following season. So not a lot of traction there because it is something that animals go after, and they don't want to have a lot of animals on their property. So composting, as I said, it is the end all be all. I've been doing it for 30 years, and I've composted everything from leaves in the yard to whales and dolphins, the ones that passed on the beach, of course. It's been pretty good. So it is a biological process that transforms raw organic materials, normally or namely nitrogen and carbon. Carbon is leaves and grass and hay and things like that. And nitrogen is anything that contains nitrogen and is putrescible. It has a smell to it as it decomposes. We blend those together in the proper recipe, and it generates that beautiful material called compost, which is not a fertilizer. It is a soil additive that improves the quality of the soil and helps feed the organisms. It is low cost. It's low tech. Can be done small scale. Whenever we talk about community composting, we always look at home compost bins first. And then those that don't want to do that, collecting in a local area like your transfer station, and either collecting the food there and composting it locally, or possibly delivering it to another site nearby that does the composting for you. And when in doubt, we also have a lot of farms that are no longer as prosperous as dairy farms, but they have the infrastructure. And so they can develop a compost management plan to actually compost food scraps at their place. So you'll hear more about that a little bit later on today. But it takes the organics out of the trash, and it gives us something that we can use locally to improve our soils. So it's a positive thing both ways. And when you do compost, you do have a reduction. The cool thing about composting is that as the process works, it releases carbon dioxide and water vapor to the atmosphere. Now I've been grabbed to the side, and they say, well, carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas. But methane, which comes from rotting food, is 25 times more potent than it is bad greenhouse gas. So we're talking about generating a little versus a lot. So, and we still have usable material for our soil where we can sequester carbon into the soil, and that helps our climate change. So you have less odor and less leaching from material once it's been composted, and it is definitely a marketable product. A lot of communities are generating income by making compost and saving on tipping fees by not disposing of food. So it becomes a plus, and Suzanne will talk about that a little bit more when she comes on. All right, so anyways, just, I forgot this had the action one, but we talked about the organic matter, that's the feed for the soil. The tilth of the soil is you can take a very heavy, thick clay soil, add compost, and it improves the ability of roots to penetrate, water to drain through, and the soil to be much healthier. Conversely, you can take a soil that's very sandy, add the organic matter, and it builds up the structure and allows it to promote life. So compost really is the solution to pretty much anything. So if you ever had to ask, there you go. It does hold the moisture, enhances the root growth, but the other thing is that many of the organisms in the compost actually help to make the plant more vigorous. And when it becomes more vigorous, it is more resistant to pathogens. For example, potato plants grown in compost may receive blight, but not be affected by it because they become genetically more vigorous because of it. So compost is proven to be very good at suppressing plant diseases. Now there's all kinds of ways to compost. No matter what someone does for a system, I congratulate them on compost. If I think their system doesn't get enough air, like this one would not be a very good system, it doesn't have enough air flowing through it, I talk about ways to improve it, but I never tell them their system stinks. Because you've got to applaud people for composting in the first place, and you've got to blow them up. Right? You find ways to augment what they're doing. This is probably one of my favorite. This is Massachusetts Middle School in Waterboro. The science teacher, David Pope, reached out to me several years ago, and we started this operation based on what he saw at the University of Maine at Farmington's compost site. And that is students collect food scraps from the cafeteria, they bring it outside, and you see the tractor right behind it is a huge pile of horse manure. And it's horse manure that comes out of the racetrack. It's got a lot of energy because it's got some urine, some feces, it's already mixed. And so it's cooking about 140 degrees. They dig a little hole and they dump their food scraps from lunch and breakfast in, and then they cover it and they let it set. And the next day or maybe every other day, they put more in as they go around the whole pile. When they get back to the first place, the local guy that handles all their land flips it. And the idea is you do that 3 times over the course of 6 weeks, right? And you end up with a finished compost that then goes into curing, which is a 3 to 6 month period where the material just has a chance to finish out slowly. And you end up with what's on the lower right-hand corner, really dark, rich compost. That gets put back into their soil boxes to grow more plants that then put vegetables into the kitchen. So it's a circular system that works extremely well. And one of the cool things about it is the students get data from the temperatures, they get data from the weights they collect, so they can write reports on how successful they've been. So it's 100% beneficial. This is the finished product from one season. And as you can see, that stuff is just dark and rich. So that would be scooped up, put in a pile, and then they would start with a fresh pile of horse manure. So usually they get about 2 piles per school season. It works out really awesome. And on the far left is David Pope. On the far right is Mark Fisher, the principal. And the guy in the middle, I forgot his name, but he's a cool dude. He loves what he does.
Wayne Cutting, he's our tree warden.
What is it?
Wayne Cutting, he's our tree warden.
Awesome. He's really cool, and he loves it. And that's the key. If you love it, then it's going to work. So how do we get started? Well, the first thing is you have to determine what you want to do. You know, do I have a lot of food? You know, where's it being generated? What's it look like? One of the things that John Watts will tell you at Mr. Fox is contamination is a big deal. And so if you can collect the food and minimize the contamination, it makes your composting efforts better. If you collect a lot of food and it has a lot of contamination, you can always pick it out at the end, but the problem is that as you're composting, especially if it's a simple system, airflow is impeded by plastic films and other things, and the microbes, in order to do a good job, need air. Air is one of the most important things. If they go anaerobic, it produces odor. If they stay aerobic, you don't get any odor whatsoever. So the key is making sure you get lots of education. That's one of the things that Suzanne and I push very heavy. When we work with communities to get things started, we push education at the beginning. We educate the solid waste planning board. We educate anybody that wants to join, and we continue to provide education afterwards. Because the key is that you can't let people slip up. Because good education is muscle memory. So you figure out, where you want to be on the spectrum and who's going to be involved. And you need at least 2 people. One person is going to be excited and have a lot of good ideas, but one person cannot steer a whole ship. You need someone else to be able to man the sails while someone's manning the rudder. So 2 is a minimum, and those 2 have to be really into it in order for it to work. So the first thing we do is we go to everybody that wants to join, and we do what's called a food residual characterization. We just call it a waste study, but I don't try to use the word waste much because to me it's not food waste, it's food opportunity. So we do a characterization study, and we find out at the beginning, when you're doing your vegetable prep, what do you have left over. Then as you're cooking, what's left over. Then as you serve it, the plate scrapings, what's left over. Plate scrapings are the toughest one, the post-consumer, because that's where contamination can be a real critical issue. So that's where most of the education has to happen. The kitchen prep and the cooking area, you can really talk to the key people and they'll get it figured out. But talking to the public, especially the summer public, about not disposing of stuff in the organics container is really hard to do. You'll get cigarette butt, you'll get all kinds of crazy stuff. So you just keep doing it that way. But we look at all the aspects. They call it dumpster diving at the end. Some people actually do that. I look in there and kind of ocular estimate. I'm not a big dump, but there are other people like Travis Blackburn from the University of Maine who will jump right in there with a Tyvek suit on and get down to dirt. But you determine what can I recover. If you can recover, 15% or more, that's what we're going after. Okay. And then select the containers. Am I going to use little 5-gallon pails? Or am I going to use big toters in order to get this material to where it needs to go? And then, once I do have this material, how long can I hold it before it has to go away? June, July, and August, they're not going to want to hold it for more than a couple days because of the potential for odor. But in the wintertime, they may hold it for a week. And so you just need to determine all that. And then where can it go? If I do get this en masse, where can it go? Am I going to take it to the transfer station and do something locally? Am I going to go to a nearby farm and partner with them? Am I gonna go to Mr. Fox? Am I gonna go inland? Am I gonna go to Exeter? So you gotta figure out where it's gonna end up before you start collecting it. Because there's nothing worse than being super successful at collecting food and then having no home for it. So that's a big one. So this is just give you an idea. This is the kitchen area, and it shows you that they're doing a scrum line there, so they wash the plates. You got dumpsters. This is an idea of kind of how it really looks. If you do it at a school or an institution, you're only talking about a half hour to an hour to get it separated and then put it in a container, and then maybe 1 to 2 hours to get it out to the compost site and get it incorporated. So not a whole lot of time. If you want to collect the material, I tell schools and other places to weigh it because the weight will scare you. If you do this over 6 months and you weigh how much you've recovered, you'll be amazed at how much you've saved. And that's especially those that pay by the ton for their disposal fees. I have a lot of communities where, like Booth Bay is a tough one for me because the town pays for all the waste disposal. So it's very hard to get a restaurant to want to join a composting team because they don't have to pay anything. If you have no skin in the game, it's hard to convince you. Another thing is, I just read in the paper today that pay-as-you-throw may be going away. Pay-as-you-throw is one of the greatest motivators to help drive people towards doing composting. Because when you have to pay for those bags, you really are very careful about what you put in them. And that's a great way to get a program started, but they're also, I guess, a pain in the butt for Casella and other companies to pick up. It becomes a problem. So if that does happen, that could change people's views on composting and other activities, food collection. So we've got to keep an eye on that. But you take it out, you weigh it, you put it in the compost site. We take temperatures every day to make sure we know what our piles are doing. And then you basically add your bulk material and get it all ready to go. And that's all stuff we help you with. So if you decide you want to do a home composting or a community composting, the state comes and provides services to start. And then we're there if you have problems. But you need infrastructure. You want to have cost-effective transportation is the #1 killer, especially with gas going as high as it is. It's really tough. So we try to be effective on that. The containers need to be airtight and watertight because stuff will start to smell. I have people line their containers with carbon to absorb juice because juice is where the odor is. And if that gets absorbed in the carbon, you have less odor potential, right? But definitely airtight, watertight. Long term, it's very hard to get a contract from someone that wants to get rid of their food scraps because they're always looking for a cheaper option. And having like a 5-year contract binds them into you. But there's got to be, a lot of understanding between the two entities in order for that contract to make sense. But sometimes contracts is a guarantee to both sides. So we try to look for that. And then predictability and professionality. If they're going to bring you material, you need to receive it. If you have business hours, I'm open from 8 to 4, and you decide to close at 3:30 or 3 o'clock, and a truck comes with food, they're going to be really unhappy. So you've got to mean what you say and stick to it. And then the biggest one is managing public perceptions. Any new idea upsets the community, especially a community that deals with tourism. If you say we're going to do a compost operation, the first thing they're going to say is it's going to smell, it's going to attract animals, it's going to make our tourism go away, and you've got to really just have those discussions. So what we do is we actually go to the town council, the select board, the city select, whatever it is, and we talk about it. We explain what we hope to do, and we always start slow. And we develop momentum as we go, but we never do a big program because a big program is a big fail. You start small and then you grow. And so that's always the promise that we make. Because honestly, what the public feels becomes your reality. Even though they may be totally wrong, enough of them get together and it can kill any project. So this is a typical situation where the community that starts out with collections, and you might have citizens bring in their food from a week's worth of collection, and they bring it in like that, and then it gets dumped into a container where it's consolidated. This is the case where it's actually being weighed. This is an example of a community that went to the next level. And these are bigger containers. These would be at each residence, and they would fill that up over the course of a week, and then that would be picked up and brought to a centralized area. This is, even bigger. This is the kind of stuff you see in Santa Barbara, California. They have a 93% organics reduction rate, and they use containers like that. All theirs are bright yellow, so people know what food goes into. But really, the most important part is that when you develop your team, every member of the team has a chance to hit the panic button. Everybody has the same value. Because if everybody feels validated and they know they have the same value, you're going to be successful. If you try to lead it as you know, I'm the commander and you're the peons, it's not going to work. Because a lot of this time is volunteer. And volunteers need validation. So everybody gets an opportunity to have a say. And it's got to be good for everybody. It's got to be good for the community. And the key players, administration, has to be supportive. Administration has to be part of the team. They don't have to do anything but attend meetings and be part of the team. So that they can then let their council know this is what this group is doing. And it works out really well. And then the big key is education, education, education. Here's what goes in, here's what stays out, here's why it stays out. And then as you run the program, every time there's a failure or a setback, you talk about it and make it a teachable moment. And then you keep building. Lots of feedback, positive reinforcement, not negative. If someone screws up, you don't say, I can't believe you did that. You say, okay, this is what we're doing. What you did here is something that doesn't really help. And if you did it this way, it would help. And that's less of a painful lesson than, I can't believe you did that. That was a stupid thing to do. So really lots and lots of positive reinforcement. And always, always reinforce the partnerships. Have lots of meetings, validate your successes. So as far as what we've done, I've been working with food since '91. But honestly, in 2004, the State Planning Office held this food summit. And it was awesome because it basically got us all thinking about moving food scraps towards higher and better uses. They actually came out with, in 2004, 50% recycling is our goal, and moving food scraps is going to do it. So that just tells you how far we've come. I mean, we're still not at 50%, but we're getting better. 2005, we actually built the Sandy River Recycling Center based on input from this symposium. I graduated from University of Farmington. Sandy River Recycling was in Farmington. So I met with the guy running the facility. His name was Ron Slater. And at Java Joe's, we designed the whole facility. I then was excited, went to the department, wrote the whole application out, and gave it to my boss, who told me that I could not write the permit because I had written the actual application. So another person from the Bangor office actually wrote the permit, which is still running today. It is a facility that takes all the food scraps from University of Maine at Farmington, horse manure from the racetrack in the town, so it's a town-gown relationship. And we make enough compost that we generate about $9,000 a year in sales, and it costs less than $6,000 to run the facility. So that extra money, we do a summer student intern in composting waste management every year. And so it really is a cool example of something that can become sustainable given the right atmosphere and the right cooperation. So since 2005, we have had a strong relationship between the town and University of Farmington. 2010, we developed the new rules, which led to what Mark's going to talk about at the end, on-farm composting manuals. We had our waste stream study done in 2011, which came up with 28 to 40%. About 28% was the sweet spot for how much waste is actually organic waste. And 2013, we created the Organics Management Guide, which I have on the website. That's free. I have 2 guides that I've written that are free. And then 2014, we started our food scrap collection workshop, which is basically this workshop, but it was a little different. 2016, we developed the utilization hierarchy and the 10-step guide on composting in schools, which is also available for free. 2017, we started with the pilot projects. And those pilot projects carried forward to when Suzanne got a grant from us to do more, and we've developed those. 2018, we did the Island Initiative. I hopped from island to island to island along the coast to try and set up compost operations. And some of those were very successful. Others, because of the transition of people living on the island, I lost valuable infrastructure and they need to be re-fixed. So I'm hoping that Dominique and I can do another island initiative this year. 2019, we did organics collection and we developed kind of the concept of the Consolidated Collection Center. So I wanted to just talk really briefly about our Waste Diversion Grant Program. There's currently a cycle that just ended September 14th. We give roughly 125 to 150,000 twice a year to worthwhile projects. And these projects receive extremely high priority if they are from municipal or regional associations. So municipalities, I know Kennebunkport and Kennebunk both got grants from us to do the home compost bins, and we're very excited about that. And we want to remove and recycle organic materials from the waste stream. So any project that offers that opportunity gets a very high priority. We want underserved areas, so a lot of our coastal communities, down east and up in the county. We're looking for anything, education, food donation, waste diversion. You know, if you want to hire some interns to go out and do education, that's something that's exciting. Even though it doesn't result in waste diversion at that moment, it creates the potential for it to occur beyond. So we like to think beyond the moment. And so any of those opportunities are really great. If it addresses a statewide need, food is a big one. So as you can imagine, 80% of the proposals we receive are all about organics recycling, which is totally fine with me because that's kind of what the state planning office originally did with their waste diversion grants, which is mostly around food scraps. But we also love anything that addresses climate change and greenhouse gas emissions. And we want to look at expanding the types of materials that can be recovered. And newer and higher better uses. I think one of the most exciting ones to me was the last round. The city of South Portland applied for a grant to create an electric tool lending library. And the way that it worked is we gave them money and they went out and bought a whole bunch of electric tools, battery powered different tools, weed whackers, that kind of stuff. And they put it in a part of the library and you could sign it out and try it out before you buy your own. And it was really a very cool, innovative idea. And it touched on climate change, it touched on reduce, reuse, reduction, it touched on all kinds of different things. The other side of that coin is we also pay for tool repair centers, where you bring in a chainsaw that's broken and a bunch of mechanics that are retired, hold a workshop and people fix their stuff. And it gets another life. So those are very exciting ways to get that reuse out there too. So very, very cool stuff. So these are the guides that are available. If you go, either send me an email, I'll send to you directly, or if you go to maine.gov/DEP, they're on our website. You can download them and do whatever you want with them. They've gone all over the country. Basically, they just are really helpful information. They're not thick, they're probably about 40 pages each or so, and they're just very helpful. So those are available to anybody. This I just wanted to end with a really cool pilot project. This is the town of Skowhegan. I met the select board, and basically they didn't want to try anything. And I said, would you let me have 50 residences, collect food, bring it to the transfer station, and we'll compost it there. And we started with that project, and it has blossomed into a really beautiful scenario where they create a leaf and yard compost that's, it's okay. And then this stuff that's really premium. And I've tried to get them to sell it, but the guy that ran the plant for years and years and years, Randy Gray, who's now retired, would not sell it. He always gave it away. And so this high quality compost was really sought after by a whole bunch of folks because they want it for their gardens, they want it for, around their rhododendrons and things like that. But the idea is that they start out with a simple bucket that everybody that comes to a workshop we do gets a bucket, and they can bring that twice a week to the transfer station, dump their food into a 2-yard tipper. And at the end of the week, that 2-yard tipper is about half full. A skid steer picks it up and dumps it into the compost pile. And so that happens similar to Farmington. They build a big loaf and they kind of go around. And it's pretty cool how it works. And you can see that they end up with a lot of compost. That little screen there, that's a little tiny screen. It's made by Thomas Bandsaw Mills. And it's a trommel screen that operates off of a 4-stroke gas motor. And it is the coolest thing. And he sells those for so much less than a regular trommel screen, and it's made in Maine. So I give him props because he usually does a free demo if someone asks for it. But it makes really beautiful compost. And then the open house, we have games. Casella does their recycling, so Casella brought frisbees and koozies and all kinds of cool stuff for the people to have for swag, for showing up. And we sponsored a poster contest. The kid that did the poster that was best voted on receive a home compost bin, a little 2-gallon container to collect food scraps, and a whole bunch of paraphernalia about composting. So it's community spirit boosted on all different angles. And then this is the farm to compost site, the one we designed in the back of the napkin. State planning paid $25,000, which is within the zone of our current grant. We give as much as $40,000 per applicant. So we could have paid for this as well. And this operation does about 100 tons a year right now, and has room to grow. But all that was built for $25,000, 75 by 100 foot pad. Food is collected in the cafeteria, kitchen prep, and then it's brought to the site. It's weighed, dropped in the skid steer, punched in the pile, and we just call it a day. And at the end of the season, usually we do it right through the winter, but at the end of the season, usually early April, we start a fresh season, and we'll have a sale in April, we'll have a sale in July, and then we'll have a sale in October. And the October sale is hot compost, which we use to put the garden to bed and keep that soil warm and fertile longer into the season. So it works really, really good. So the final thought on keeping and diverting it is encourage cleaning and share tables whenever you can. Food donation is huge. Promote backyard composting always. I don't promote one without the other because they're hand in hand. We'll talk about a public kiosk in this next talk. Leaf composting programs can accept food. They've got to be hot though. If you put food into fresh leaves, it's going to start to stink and attract animals. But if you get a pile of leaf and grass mixing and cooking, then you add your food, it'll take right off. And we can help with that. People need a little assistance. And as I said, I'm available. You can call me, you can email me. I travel the whole state. I go from Stetton to Stern and east to west. All right. So now, those are real problems. So I thought of what are some ways that I can get this food to where somebody wants it, right? Because we can't do any more grants because state planning doesn't exist. How am I going to get people to collect food? So I came up with the idea of consolidated collection. And it's nothing more than simply making a transfer station for food scraps. And the idea was that we would have starting transfer stations receiving organics and have them receive it in a large amount so that I could then reach out to places like Exeter and when I AgriCycle and say, look, I've got 25 yards of material here. It's worth your while to come down and get it. And it was a really cool idea. One of the problems, though, and this is my MO, I don't know if it's ADHD or what it is, but I started telling people about it before I talked to my department. And what happens is that my group I was in was called Residuals, and that dealt with composting and things like that. This actually becomes a transfer station, which is not even in my program. It's actually in Mike Parker's program, who's going to talk in a little bit. And the problem wasn't just that I didn't tell them, it's that it caught on and people started doing it. Pretty soon, his boss found out about it, and she already knows me, so fortunately I had many, many years working with her. And so she wasn't mad, she was just, okay, now what are we going to do? And trying to get a transfer station license for food toters doesn't make sense. And, you know, the department would look horrible if they started doing that, because what if there's 300 of these? You know, you just can't do it. So what they did is they developed a registration process. They were very kind, they didn't kill me, they didn't put me on a cross, and it is now working out great. But the idea is that it's food scrap transfer station, you have one centralized location, put a lot of mass together, and it doesn't mean that it has to go out of town. You can put it together and then compost it on your own. You can do it at a farm, you can do it at John's, or you can send it out of town. But the idea is we just wanted those food scraps not to end up in the landfill. So for rural communities, it was perfect because I had a lot of communities that said, we want to compost, but we don't have any space. We don't have any farms. You know, like Rangeley said, we've got this little tiny transfer station, what are we going to do? And I said, well, what about if you collect the food and then somebody comes and gets it? And so that became kind of a little push for people. They thought that was kind of exciting. So it did start to take off a little bit. Now, the trick to these things is that you are storing stuff, and it is putrescible stuff that can be odorous and attract animals, so you've got to have ways to absorb it, like adding carbon, you have to have tight fitting lids and all that. But once you get by all that material, then it's just, you really want to have a place for it to go. Starting a program and collecting food, you've got to have an endpoint. So that's really where it gets creative. But this, the bottom picture is actually, I actually saw this before I came up with the idea of the subway. This is the Virginia Department of Transportation. That's what they do. They roadkill deer. They put them in these containers with carbon, and they have air blowing in it, and so they compost all their roadkill. And I said, man, that'd be ideal for food. So it just kind of, it all came together. But, so Mike will talk to you more about how they're regulated and managed out. But basically, we need volume. We need volume. Because in order for anybody to come, they've got to have a reason to stop. Like Exeter will come, AgriCycle will come, and they'll charge you a stop fee, and then they charge you the number of totes. So if you have 3 totes out there, even if 2 are empty, they're going to charge you for the 3. So the first trick I learned is only put 1 out until you fill it, and then add another one if you need to. So that, Suzanne and I actually figured that out for Winslow. But the idea is that people want that volume. So some of the benefits, you can accumulate it together, and trucking becomes feasible. With gas as high as it is, diesel as high as it is, people want the most for their haul. So we're trying to make them happy there. Allow residents to source, separate, and collect food, and bring it somewhere. And once again, education is so important, but you also have to have an outlet. Because if you get people fired up to bring food to you, and then all of a sudden you say, I'm sorry, we can't take it anymore because we lost our outlet, they're done. They're done, they're done. They have to have a continuing opportunity to do it. So you got to make sure 3 steps ahead that if this guy falls out, who's the next guy that's going to come? So it requires a lot of forethought before you even implement the program. But if you get it successful, it's a beautiful thing. It does help for fulfilling the demand for organics. For Exeter has a 2.5 million gallon storage, and they aren't even close to filling 60% of it. So they will come, for example. Mr. Fox has capacity. He will come. So really, it's just getting people fired up about doing it. And then basically, selfishly, this is the last thing I care about, to be honest with you. The recycling rate is cool, it's a cool thing, but it's not my glass ceiling. My glass ceiling is just seeing landfills full of garbage, and that's it. Because that space is expensive and valuable for garbage. When I hear organics go in there, it's not a cool thing. So that's my glass ceiling. So how do you get started? The first thing is, what do I have for infrastructure? I have a transfer station. I have a lot of extra space I haven't developed. Boom. I am a collection compost area. Or I have a little space at my landfill where I can put a couple of containers. I'm a collection area. So what infrastructure is there? Do I have a farm that the guy passed away and someone just bought it and they're thinking of tearing it down and building a bunch of houses? Voila, I've got infrastructure, maybe I can redevelop that. So really, really important. But you need to have a good trucking system, you need to have a good company you're partnerships with. Okay, Casella, we've had some calls with them. That's a possibility, you know. They're willing to truck material to places. They don't really have a lot of processing in the state of Maine for organics, but they have the trucking infrastructure. So that's another possibility. And then you need to have good vehicles, good containers, and you need to identify, am I going to do buckets or toters, right? And then figure out that. Is your staff well trained? And I will tell you, training your staff is an exercise in patience. Because if you give them a new task that they have never done before, and you say you're doing it, you're going to get a different reception than if you say, here's a cool opportunity for you to learn something and help us grow as a community. Would you like to participate? And you know, if they say no, then you have to go back to some other tactic. But usually people, given the opportunity to grow and develop and do something cool, will jump onto it. And then that positive reinforcement, right? Positive reinforcement keeps it going. And then, do I have adequate financial resources? Well, if you have a good long-term contract and you know that you're going to have an ability to save money by avoided tipping fees, then you can pay someone to take it away, right? And then, am I ready to handle any problems? Odors, leachate. That scares the Jesus out of people because they're afraid the DEP is going to come in and shut them down. We will work with you. We will help fix problems. Call us before the problem becomes big, and we can definitely fix it. If it becomes really huge, we can fix it too, but the fix may be a little bit different than if it was just a little teeny. And then vectors and scavenging animals, that's what people see. When you say I'm going to collect food scraps, they see rats. rats and seagulls, rats and seagulls. You're like, no, we're gonna fix this, it'll be all good. Anyways, and then litter and vandalism, but those are mine. Contamination, always the biggest issue. So training staff, as I said, exercise and patience, but they will learn if you give them an opportunity and you make it a question instead of a demand. And I will tell you that you can make a question demanding without making it demanding. That's good. So some of the outlets, these are all places in your communities that have excess food all the time. And that's really a big deal, excess food all the time. And so we just try to find ways to do it. I know, for example, Garbage to Garden in Portland has this key niche where they deal with all people that want to have a zero waste event. And they come in and they take it all. They take even the stuff they won't compost and they dispose of it because they bid out the zero waste event. And people love that. And Garbage to Garden is all young, wholesome people. They use Ivory soap and all that good stuff. They're glistening. They don't have any fake cosmetics or anything. And they just come in and you're just like, wow, Garbage to Garden, that's awesome. It's just young, wholesome people. And so that's a niche, but there are other folks that are doing that as well. We have a thing called Scrap Dogs located in the Mid-Coast. Same idea. And they're young and they're wholesome and people love that. And so you just got to tap into that. So I do want to take a few things off because these two things here, unbleached paper and soil pizza boxes, since the advent of PFAS, we have found that there are lots of paper liners that contain PFAS. So we've dropped them to the stay away from line. So we want only organics, coffee grounds. Coffee filters are still a bit queasy, but if someone won't deliver their coffee grounds, so let's say the coffee filters and we'll take them. But the net result is pizza boxes and the McDonald's wrappers, no way. If you ever want to see a webinar that scares you, look at the webinar on food packaging and PFAS. It is amazing what they found with just McDonald's and Burger King, just the wrapper on the burger. It's really got high numbers on it. So, anyways, now pet waste. When I say stay away, let me do a little sidebar on that. I love composting pet waste. I do it in the same container that I would use for food scraps at home, but when I'm done, the pet waste is put in an area where humans aren't going to grow anything and they're not going to walk barefoot. So it might be the edge of the woods, it might be around trees that are maybe dying, we want to help rejuvenate, but it's not going to be in a human traffic area. Because that material is rich in nutrients and it's a great compost. It's just it may contain some roundworms and parasites and nematodes that survive the compost process that if you get them on your hands and then you don't wash your hands because you're just in your lovely garden and you grab an Italian sandwich, you might give yourself some tapeworms. Great way to lose weight, but not good. We try to stay away from that. So this is the bread and the butter. See how clean that is, how rich that is? That's what we want to put in our compost pile. That's awesome stuff. This is also awesome stuff, but I have seen a pile of shrimp put on the ground 48 hours later become an oil slick. Where'd it go? It went into the ground because the soap trestle, it just dissolves and enters the soil. So you've got to be careful. This kind of stuff here, I receive it on a bed of carbon and I immediately mix it. It's your first chance to control odors, your first chance to absorb leachate, and you actually start that intimate process that makes it compost. And you take away the juice, you take away the stink. So that's the quickest way to make it not smell. And people do that until they forget. And that's why Suzanne and I are constantly reminding them to do that. This is beautiful stuff, except for around each head of broccoli are the rubber bands, right, that hold them all together. So we've got to get rid of those. But that's good stuff. So that's the pre-consumer. We definitely love that. And then you got your sort of your middle, right, and your post-consumer plate scrapings that come in. That's also good stuff. It's a chance before you scrape it into the bucket to pull out the napkins and the other stuff. Kitchen staff won't do that because they think it's gross, but if you tell them it's a cool thing for the environment and to help their community, they'll put on gloves and do it. It's not that big a step. It's just that it's another thing to do if you tell them to do it. But if you ask them to be part of a cool team that's going to do stuff for the environment and be awesome, then they'll do it. It's just perspective. As far as it goes, separation is not that difficult, Lots of education, always education. Consistency, consistent education and consistent positive reinforcement when they do a good job and gentle negative nudging when they don't. But that feedback loop is super needed. And then the way you institutionalize it is that when you get new employees in, you train them to do it. You don't have them learn from someone who's doing it. You spend time and train them in the way you want it done. So it's time well spent. This is just a school, and these are the kids. And the kids are doing it right. What you don't see is right behind the kids is the tall custodian, looks like Mr. Clean, totally bald with a little earring. And he's telling them when they do a good job and when they do a bad job, no, 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 you meant here, right? Because this is the good bucket. And that is positive reinforcement. And the custodian gets to interact with the kids, which they don't get to do normally. They're the scary guy with the mop that can walk by and they're 10 feet tall. Now they're here interacting with you and they like their job and what they're doing that day. So it's always about bringing people together. This is the scale that we can look at for collection of food. We have kiosks like Diversion Garden uses. You got a couple of toters there. You've got Colby College that uses a big container that then goes to AgriCycle. Or you've got a commercial operation where they just drop it off at a collection center similar to Mr. Fox has, and he just puts it up in a pile until the big truck comes and fills it. Once again, I showed you those toters, but those are the most convenient. They're about 34 gallons, the ideal size, you know, for dealing with most residents around Kennebunk. It would be really good, I think, if you did it too in the summertime. We could try a little pilot trial with maybe some of the restaurants. I think it'd be cool. I mean, this is storage at a transfer station. This is not how I would advocate storage. I would have a bed of carbon, dump all that food, and then cover it. Because if that is like that, seagulls and other animals are going to be all over it. But the minute you cover it with carbon, it takes away the opportunity. So it's just how you store it. Then the big, large containers, as I showed you previously. Do you have room? Do you have space? Identify a location. We did, in the case of Winslow, we did it at the public library in a corner of the parking lot, which is just opposite the public works. Worked perfectly. So it doesn't have to be at the transfer station. DEP is just going to ask you where it is, and that's going to be what Mike talks about. As far as footprint, I mean, we're talking about it could be as little as 15 to 25 feet, a little tiny area, or you might actually get, you know, up to maybe something, you know, 40, 50 feet. It's not a big area. It's a couple of containers that can be easily accessed by the vehicle doing the dumping of the containers. So, not a big deal at all. It makes really good sense, and it works really well. You just got to keep it clean. If you find a lot of contamination in a bin, you put a sign on the top that says, please, next person that dumps in here, pull all your plastics and other contaminants out. Make it very prominent with bold lettering and the whole shebang. And then you start reaching out to your community newsletter and have a thing go around, hey guys, we're doing a great job of collecting food. We've gotten a little sloppy, a lot of contamination. Can we please clean it up because this is for the benefit of the whole community. Really simple stuff that goes a long way. And then once a week, minimum, 2 to 3 times a week, depending on the season. Super hot summer, June, July, and August. Got a smell, definitely be on top of it. Odors of leachate, absorb it. And then if you reach out when the problems first begin, and that means to me, to Mike, to whoever is the person that works in your area, it might be Eric Hamlin, it might be, I think, either Willie, Eric, the two that work with me. We can fix it before it gets too big, and that's the key. So as far as the generator goes, this is the person that's making the food scraps. They need infrastructure, a transportation option that's not going to cost a lot of money, a low budget, long-term options. A contract would be nice, but once again, predictability and professionality, and they want to make sure that everything is managed well. Haulers, they need volume. They want a milk run. So I talked to on the phone with some Casella folks the other day, Suzanne and I. And one of the most important things is that when they're driving their vehicle around, they want to have lots of frequent pickups and get volume because it makes sense to them. If they're going to drive in an area that's highly congested, having lots of pickups makes it worth their while. And then, you can see people that will subcontract routes. A lot of companies have actually sold their actual hauling contracts to others, but long-term contracts are really good. So the digester wants it to be close, they want volume, they want it to work well, and they want basically no adverse impacts to their surrounding community. They've got these big balloons that are full of gas. And they actually had, when they first started, they had trouble with foam, and it made the balloon on the top so taut that it actually broke the emergency safety net on top, and it was about to blow. And they actually reached out to Anheuser-Busch in St. Louis that has a ginormous digester, and they said, put a prop in there and spin it, and your foam will go away. And they did that, their foam went away, and their top went, and everything was full. So, but could have been a problem if it had blown. That could have been a lot of methane in that community. So, public safety reality, you see that side, that's what I see. When I see food scraps, I see beautiful compost piles. I tell people about food scraps, they see rats. So, just trying to soften the blow a bit. This is another example. This is storage outside of a restaurant. That's storage in a beautiful community in British Columbia. The difference is that's bear proof because they got lots of bears there. Okay, this person doesn't deal with bears. But as long as those containers are well maintained and the lids stay down and they're fairly airtight, neither one is going to have an odor problem. So it's just a different perspective. This is a residential food collection aspect, and basically that's that idea of the automated milk run, where the truck comes by, the tipper's on the side, it dumps, goes through the whole community, picks up all the food, and it's a quick run. Garbage to Garden actually has a dump trailer that they use that has a tipper on the side, but other communities actually have a packer truck with the tipper in the back. But it doesn't matter, it needs to be an easy milk run. So this is where I want to finish up. This is a company that started basically in the back of Tyler Frank's parents' apartment. And he started it with a partner. And basically it was a simple setup where we'll collect your food scraps and we'll bring them to a compost site. And what he actually did is they collected food scraps and they brought them to a site for many years in Gorham, Cape Bend Farms, which does a really good compost operation. And what happened is that they were doing $15 a month. Actually, back then, I think it was about $10 a month. But you got a 5-gallon bucket, and they would pick it up. If there was contamination in the bucket, the contamination would be left inside the clean bucket with a note that said, you guys are doing a great job. Just next time, could you not put this in here because this doesn't help us at all? And basically, they got the message, right? If they did it twice, then they got a different colored note, a little frowny face that said, please, we're trying to do a good job here. But the idea was they never said, you're a horrible person, you should never do this again, because that's just negative. So it worked really decent. City of Portland has a paper bag system, and I'll tell you that really helps me a lot. So if that goes away, I'm gonna have to think of a different approach, but paper bag makes people stand up and take notice. Waterville Institute one, same idea. And it gets people to look at food differently as, I don't want that in my bag, it's too heavy, it's too wet, I'm gonna put it over here and go to composting. So that's really kind of a good stimulant. But the other advantage of this company is that if you want, anytime, they'll bring you a bag of compost. So in the spring, if you want to plant in your garden, or you have some flowers you're putting in, they'll bring you a bag of compost, anytime you ask for it. So it's kind of a nice benefit of the program. But the buckets are picked up weekly, and they're dumped in this trailer. They also have toters at some of the bigger apartments and businesses. Right? The same idea, they dump them in there. Most of all of their stuff now goes up to AgriCycle. And this is where it was going to, this is Cape Bend Farm in Gorham. This is what it looked like when it came out. And as you can see, very little contamination. That was one of the really cool things. And then this is the digester up next there. You can see the two domes there. It's pretty massive setup. So I didn't give enough kudos to AgriCycle at the last event, so I will today. They take in organics from all over New England. it goes through their system, it creates lots of energy, which goes into the grid, but the outputs are what they call digestate. There's a liquid and a solid portion. The digestate goes through a heated screw press, which compresses it and squeezes all the juice out. The pulp goes under their cows. They have a 2,000 head dairy farm as bedding, okay? And the juice goes out to a storage pond out on the property, and it is spray irrigated on crops. So they are a complete closed loop system. There's zero waste with them. So it's really cool, and it's really nice. But simultaneously, for the communities that really need soil additives, it doesn't help them. Now, I am working with the company to get them to give compost back to their membership communities. And it's a struggle, but I'm still working on it because people need to get something back. You're giving nutrients away, you need to get something back. So, in the case of composting locally, you get something back. And that's just all I'll say about that. So key takeaways, if you're gonna do consolidation, good tight fitting lid, a watertight or lined with something to help absorb any liquids. Drain plugs to reduce moisture buildup. So think about drain plugs. Once you undo a drain plug from a bin that's had stuff sitting in it, it doesn't always want to go back in and be watertight. So you've got to be careful about that. Clean impervious work surface. Remove the material timely so you don't have a lot of odors, because then you'll have no odors, no vector, or leachate issues. So the best waste reduction is just to avoid creating it, but we all know that that's impossible to do. We buy stuff, we expect we're going to have a party, and we buy all this stuff, we end up using 40% of it. The rest of it goes and goes. I mean, I grew a huge garden this year, and we gave away 50% of it because we just couldn't keep up with it. And you know, the idea of growing something and not using it kills me. So identify any obstacles right away and figure out how to overcome them. Create a program that benefits many. Have fun doing it, and I should have as my last bullet, educate often, all the time, because that's the key. And that's it. I'll take some questions, and Suzanne, we got to get you set up. So any questions? So you guys, how many people in this room are from Kennebunk? How many of you got a home compost bin during the promotion? All right, okay, not bad. So that's a big deal. Those lobster trap bins, they last forever. And I have one that I use as a demonstrator at the compost school that's over 20 years old. It's still just as shiny as the day I got it.
Good morning. My name is Suzanne Lee. I'm a faculty fellow from the University of Maine, the Mitchell Center for Sustainability Solutions, and I want to thank you all again for coming this morning, and thank you to Kennebunk really for hosting this and making all the arrangements. So it's really terrific. And I guess I don't know if you're aware, just to give you a background on the Mitchell Center at the University of Maine. We're a research center, and really the goal of our research center is to, can everybody hear you? The goal of our center is to really help the state solve some of the more complex problems related to materials management and other sort of environmental concerns. So while we sit up in Orono, we actually work with universities and institutions all over the country and around the world. We actually invite students and have participation from lots of different institutions, because our belief at the Mitchell Center is that to solve these complicated problems, it takes a team, and it takes a multidisciplinary team. So, our program is exactly the opposite of sitting up in the ivory tower, sitting up in Orono, and hey, how do we think we can help the world? Our approach is to actually come out and meet with the groups, and that's why, I would say about my presentation today, it's as much learning from you about the issues that you see, what you think the challenges are, what you see as the opportunities, and for us to sort of discuss that and see how we can do things to help you move in the direction of food waste management. So that's the Mitchell Center, and really, as Mark sort of said, we really work in partnership very closely with the DEP, because they have the ideas, they know what needs to be done, and our goal is to use our faculty student team, one, to do the research, to gather the data that sort of supports the things that they're working on, and also, the huge bonus is that we have all these students who need to learn and need to be workforce ready. So one of the ways that we do that is by actually utilizing them in these projects, working with the community. So hopefully they'll be so excited to stay here in Maine and continue their work after they graduate. So it's really, and actually we have Dominique is here this morning, and she was actually a past student intern at the Mitchell Center, now working with the DEP. So we have sort of proof of concept right here. So anyway, so because it's meant to be interactive, I have a whole presentation, but raise your hand at any point if you have any question, if you have any issue, anything, feel free. So, and basically, I guess our approach, in working with the DEP and in talking about food waste management, when we talk about sustainability solutions, you might think that we're talking about some sort of green, we believe in the environment, and that's really, that's how we talk about this. But actually, I guess I should say my background is from corporate America. I actually worked 30 years in sort of the food business, and maybe I'm newer to the world of sustainability. But I taught for a little while at the business school, actually, at the University of Maine. And what I came to really understand is that sustainability is about a triple bottom line. First of all, you have to have the money to be able to do the work. Then the work has to really, it's important that it benefit people. So there's no point to doing a solution's not sustainable if it's not benefiting people. And also you have to take care of the environment for the solution also. So every sustainability solution that we have, we certainly understand the financial implications, we understand the social implications and work on that, and also environmental. So that's what I'll do. Who knew before you came this morning that food waste was a problem? You raised your hand. Okay, so I won't spend too much time on the issue, but the fact is that 40% of the food that we produce is actually wasted. Which when I discovered that, I thought that was a typo. I thought we can't really do that, right? It's like you buy 5 bags of groceries at the grocery store, and you actually drop 2 of them on the way to your car, and you don't care. You just keep going. And that's sort of the magnitude of the problem and how we approach it. And so clearly something needs to be done, because not only is it the money of the cost of that food in those grocery bags that you dropped on the ground, but it's actually also the waste of the resources that went to produce that food that you paid for, that you left behind. There's water, about 20% of our fresh water supply goes to producing food that actually we never eat, and everybody's aware of the drought situation. This should be a concern to everybody. We waste money, we waste food, and one of the things I think is really interesting about all the work that Mark talked about is that what we're moving to, when we talk about food waste, we're talking about it's a byproduct of a broken food system. We're wasting food, and we're wasting the energy that comes from the food because we end up throwing it in the trash. 97%, the statistics are, of our food waste just ends up in the trash, in the landfill. So that those vitamins, the nutrients, the energy that's in food that's meant to be utilized actually gets thrown away. So, we have to stop that. We have to address that. And at the same time, not only, are we wasting all this money twice, because we waste the first part of the food we pay for, we waste the money of the resources that went into it, but we also are causing ourselves a lot of trouble. So food waste is actually one of the largest, I think the 3rd largest cause of greenhouse gas emissions, so leading to climate change. So that is really a problem. We also, in the state of Maine, we unfortunately located a lot of our landfills next to our water sources. So we actually have landfills next to rivers and streams. Unfortunately, landfills were not created to hold food waste. Nobody ever thought that people in future generations would throw food away. So that it was really, landfills were designed to hold dry trash. Well, now we're dumping the single largest component of our waste stream in Maine is food. So it's become the #1 thing that we most often throw away, leading to sort of leachate that is coming out of those landfills and threatening our water supply. So we're causing ourselves trouble in that. And then, Mark talked about food insecurity. We lead New England in food insecurity at the same time that we're throwing our food away. So, another important, I think, statistic is that they just did some recent research and found that if people would donate food instead of throwing it away, so that good edible food could actually cut food insecurity by 50%. So, it's really important to be looking at. Any questions about?
I just wanted to say one thing, Suzanne.
Sure.
In Seattle, where we used to live, we had a large contingent of people that shared food. If you had an apple tree with extra apples, there was a website you could put it on and people could come pick your apples. Or a restaurant that had extra bread or muffins, and so that I think that was, I found really impressive the community approach with, you didn't necessarily have to be food insecure, you just were supporting your community in general by sharing the food that you had.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, that's a really great point, and it goes to the hierarchy, which number one is just reducing your waste, but number two is, feeding people. And it doesn't say feeding poor people or feeding, whatever, immigrant people. It just says feeding people, and that really is the point. And actually, that's why in our solution number two, we just say connecting food that's available with where food is needed. We don't sort of categorize it any more than that. But that's exactly, and that's that whole point of the wasted or the circular food system, right? If the circular food system is actually operating, if food gets produced on the farm, it gets distributed where food is needed, and then it gets recycled back into compost, which goes back to help the farmers grow more food, there is no waste. And the kind of system that you're talking about is a fixed food system, a system that's working right. When food is available, it goes to feed the community, improve the health, improve access for everybody in the community. And I think the best way to think about it is like a broken plumbing system, right? What happens when your plumbing system breaks? You have water spurting out everywhere. So that's what's happened with our food system. We have loss of food happening at all these various points, and that's really what our partnership here is trying to do, to fix that food system, get all the points connected. So whether it's schools or whether it's, hospitals, it's restaurants, grocery stores, everybody should be processing and moving the food to the next point in the system so that nothing gets wasted. Does that make sense? And one of the reasons why it's sort of critical that when we're doing this work is, as you can see with COVID, that when we have disruptions, it makes everything worse. So now we have food inflation because this leaky system of ours where food's getting wasted is actually leading to even more sort of food waste problems. You saw the pictures during the pandemic of milk being poured down the drain and then 2-hour-long lines at the food bank. So that's all a symptom, and with the wars and things that are going on, it's disrupting our food supply. And so even more important that we try to find these sustainable solutions. So I'm going to talk to you about the benefits of working on food waste management, profit that's available, how we can help people, and how we can help them. The work at the Mitchell Center, one important thing I want to show on the slide, again, even though we're based in Orono, we don't just sit up there and think about what to do. From the very first day in 2019 that our student team was authorized to begin this work, we went out and we talked to stakeholders. So this is just a few. I think by now we have about 200 food system members in the state of Maine that we are working with to try to solve this problem. And we literally ask them, and I think we're happy that you're here this morning from the school system in Kennebuck, because we want to know, what can we do to help you? We know there's a food waste problem, but you're the ones who really are going to solve it, so how can we help you do what you need to do? We're finding the same thing. What can we do to help set up the right sort of system? We also, of course, follow the DEP's, that food recovery hierarchy. So all of our solutions try to prioritize, number one, reducing, then feeding people, feeding animals, and then compost. And, because we work so closely with the farming community, compost and anaerobic digestion or biogas are equal, but a lot of our work really tries to get that nutrient back to the farms. And And this is just a little snapshot to remind you that we are from the university, and your tax dollars are being used wisely, and that we're employing these students to actually help you all do the work of solving this food waste problem. So these are just some of the pilots that we have going on in the state and the students working on. So in this review of talking with our stakeholders, following the DEP guidelines, and looking at a lot of the research that exists. So that's another big piece. We don't believe that we here in Maine, we're very smart and we're very talented, but we might not have all the answers to everything. So we do try to look outside of our state, around the world, and see what could be the right answers. So these are basically the 6 solutions that we have developed overall for solving food waste. The first one is tracking and measuring. And whether this is in your home kitchen, right, for the first time, try actually looking at your garbage can and see how much food is in there, and maybe even take that next step of putting that food into a separate bag and seeing over the course of a week, or you get your 5-gallon bucket, how much food am I throwing away? Because if you ask most people, they say, oh, I don't waste any. We don't waste food in our household. Well, try separating it and see what that, and if we do that with businesses, they find the same thing. I mean, at every level, businesses, municipalities, we have our population, we're very mindful, we take care of things. Okay, try measuring it. So we actually send out teams of students to work with businesses, to work with households, to work with schools, we work with the Department of Corrections to try to take a measure and make them aware of how much, and then we start working on the solutions. Solution 2 is actually what Lisa was talking about, is to create a statewide food rescue system. No longer have restaurants with food that they throw out. If there's good edible food, it should actually be connected to a soup kitchen or pantry or somewhere that food can be used. I mean, it's just common sense. Honestly, we have a K-5 program, a school program that we developed, and it's amazing how these second graders or first graders can understand that. Why would you throw away your food? There are hungry people. If somebody wants to eat it, wouldn't you try to feed them? So it's just funny how at that age it's so simple, and our lives are now so complex that somehow it just seems easier to throw it away. I think we just simply don't think about it, and it's become a bad habit. So solution 2 is trying to address that. Solution 3 is what you're all here, to educate, to talk about it, to educate us about what your challenges are, and for us to educate you about some of the promise and the potential of you beginning a food waste management program. Solution 4, what we've heard about a lot from our stakeholders is a lot of the loss in the state is actually unintended. It's actually we don't have the infrastructure in Maine to support our farmers, and so when they grow and produce this food, we didn't have enough cold storage or freezer storage. We used to have canning facilities. I wasn't here back then, but back in the day, I understand that almost every community in Maine had some ability to preserve and can what they produce. And over time, we, like everybody else, decided, we don't need to have that capability. We can import our food. We can get that canned food, from another state. We don't need to do that here. So we've lost that, and what we're really trying to do is restore that ability to process and have that infrastructure here. We're doing a lot of work to promote the education around food donation, that there's tax credits available to people who donate food. There's liability laws that protect you. There's no liability for donating food unless you willingly or knowingly, are giving away bad food. And then really the solution here today is really food recycling. And if you think about that, that's what we're talking about. Food has good, valuable potential at every stage in its production. Even when it's not edible for people, it's still useful for the soil. That's why they call compost black gold. Is that it's for creating something of real value. So we're trying to make sure, even with solution 6, that food goes to the right place. So the first part to talk about, the triple bottom line, is the profit potential. This is sort of maybe a simplistic approach, but, good to sort of give you that image, which is landfilling of food or landfilling of trash has a set sort of, an average cost. So let's just say $80 per ton for your trash to get it hauled away. So that's the green bar. And we're being very generous, probably in truth, the landfill costs are going to go up over time because there's less landfill space, so they're going to, just like everything, they're going to raise the prices and get more expensive. But, the orange bars show you the cost of food recycling which starts off high for the reason that Mark said, because you got to get somebody to stop at the location to pick it up. So you have to pay them, and maybe at first, the participation, household participation number, you can see, you don't have as many people participating. But over time, you have more people participating, you have more and more food scraps being collected, therefore the cost of the stop fee becomes, much less, and overall, the cost of food recycling is less than the cost of, landfilling that same food. Another way to think about it is, if you put the food in the trash and you stick it in the landfill, of course that you're paying somebody rent for the space for sort of the life of that food, which is like forever, and all the costs associated with it. If you're giving it to somebody in food recycling, there's a valuable end product. So whether AgriCycle is making and selling biogas out of your food scraps, or whether a composter is selling compost out of your food scraps, they have an end product. So the cost to them of actually picking up, they don't have to, you're not paying the full burden of what they're doing because they're making a product and selling it at the end. Does that make sense to you? So there is a financial advantage for everybody in the food recycling scenario. This is just a lot more detail, but to suggest to you that that is really just the landfilling per ton cost versus per ton cost. We know that there's transportation involved and facilities and labor that add to it, but even when you looked at all of that, this has been done by our economics department, there's still a cost advantage to food recycling over landfilling that food. And other states have gone through this analysis and have looked at the cost, hired very pricey consultants. So again, being very economical here in Maine, we've used that research to identify that we could have those same savings here. So that is the approach to it. And again, to break it down, so overall, it's profitable both from the cost savings, which I just showed you, but also there's some profit opportunities. A person who's home composting is saving that money on taking, they're taking the food scraps out of the trash system, so that's the savings. But the benefit to them is they're not having to buy compost. And if you look at some of that surf and turf and how much you might pay for a bag of that compost, and by contrast, you could throw your own lobster shells in the backyard and some of your other food scraps, and you'd have your own surf and turf compost. So you're saving money even at the home composting level. Okay, curbside collection with a private service, again, for the amount of food waste that you can actually dispose of through curbside versus what the curbside collector is charging you, that is still a positive opportunity. Community collection gets even more economical because now it's one site, the whole town is participating and bringing it there, and the one stop fee that you have to pay for the pickup service to take that compost, now it's really economical. And then sort of the highest level and the most economical is when a town has the ability to self-compost. So some of those examples that Mark was showing. Because of course with the cost of transportation, it means that the material is not going anywhere. It's coming from local sources, coming to one local place, being processed into compost at that local place, and being picked up by the community, all within a very small, footprint. So it's the most environmentally sound, it's the most financially beneficial, and of course it's really great for the community, so it benefits the people. So we love that as sort of the ultimate triple bottom line. Some more proven profit opportunities is that in states like Massachusetts and Vermont where they have banned, they say there can be no food waste going into the trash. So those are really good models for us to look at, and where you see that food waste collection businesses grow up. I think they said 8 times the growth in Vermont of food waste collection services. And then upcycled food products, there's also a growth in sort of upcycling, and I think, sort of the people benefits is that food donations tripled. So when Vermont went to a total food waste ban from their landfills, they saw donations to their food banks triple. So if you don't believe that there's potential for donation that exists, you could simply look at that model. When people couldn't throw away food anymore, all of a sudden they started thinking, hey, maybe where could I take this? Where could I share it with somebody else? The other benefit for people in food recycling is that, well, this is sort of an outdated slide. Average family of four saves $1,300 a year on waste food, probably before the recent numbers on food inflation, food price inflation. And so we're looking at more like about $1,800 a year the average family of four could save if they weren't wasting food. So if you think about messaging to your community and saying, at its simplest, why should anybody really bother about this? Ask them if they're concerned about what they're spending at the grocery store. Ask them if they're concerned about their food budget, and tell them you actually have a really good way for them to save money on food every year. Number one, by not throwing it away anymore. It increases food system education, participation. I'm sure that, Lisa, you could say that in your community, because of all this, people just have this heightened awareness and appreciation for the value of food and feeding each other and taking care of each other. And that really does fantastic things for a community, bringing them together, improving health benefits and everything. So it's fantastic and, leads to better quality of life. And when you're not wasting your town's funds on trash, on food trash, think of the positive quality of life improvements you can use that same money for in your town. So these are some of the benefits. For the planet, of course, I talked about, water quality, greenhouse gas emissions. They say that if food waste were a country, it would be the third largest producer of greenhouse gases after the US and China. So again, another way to think about the magnitude of the problem. The potential to regenerate Maine soil health. Mark talked a lot about the composting, and that's totally true. With the drought, the ability for farmers to retain the water. I saw that they're talking about farmers having to look at irrigation systems now, so you can tell that this is really a need in our agriculture community. And, if you love your landfill, it really extends the lifespan of the landfill and leaves room in it for other things that are more appropriate to landfill than food. The benefits, are local. So, glad you're all here from the local community because the real win is for the local area. You can actually, in your local community, if you are interested in the promise of this, there's all sorts of, there's all sorts of things you can do as a community to embrace food recycling. You don't have to wait for the state to get to it. You can do everything from even just a composting use or like encouraging that the community purchase compost, because that has been shown, like if for your municipal projects and things like that, you say, look, you need to buy compost from it locally, that will encourage your composters to be producing more, and you will get better rates, I'm sure, than buying compost from outside of the area if you can buy it locally. So something like that, sometimes they do have versions of, food for large, they also have a model for large food waste generators to actually ask them to report on their amount of food waste, which when you do that, that makes them start to think about it. It makes them think that maybe there's something better to be done. So there's a lot of things you can do, zero waste plans. You really should make it part of your climate action plan because food waste is such an important part of climate mitigation. So local people, it provides community resilience. You are protecting your own food supply here by doing this type of work. You're supporting your farmers, and you have potentially an export product that you would be creating here because maybe you get to the point that you're producing so much compost you can actually sell it, to other parts of Maine and beyond. Success stories. One of the things we have started a Maine annual food waste solutions summit. So in April. This will be the third year, this coming April, where we kind of talk about all the work that's being done and highlight the successes. And so, we love to talk about communities that are doing a great job with food waste management, showing that their communities are saving money, which we always start with that first, and benefiting their people. And I'd like to add Hannaford and Walmart into the success story because I feel it's very important to show to you that this is definitely a triple bottom line and leading with the financial opportunity because Hannaford and Walmart would not be food, recycling at every location. Every Hannaford in the state, every Walmart in the state has a pickup by AgriCycle to take away their food scraps separately. So they are in their stores somehow figuring out with their limited labor to take the time to separate the food scraps from the other waste. Because why? Do Do you think it's because they love the planet? No. They love the community? Well, yes, probably they love the planet. But number one, because their finance department has run the numbers and proven that they will save money, no matter how long it takes, the extra labor, which is minimal, as Mark pointed out, but it is a financial win for them to do that. You have support in the state, as Mark talked about the DEP grants. You have the Mitchell Center and our student faculty team willing to help you in this work, technical assistance at every level, and these are just to show you some of the updates. We did this last year of food recycling. We did a number of pilots with Waterville, with Portland, with Winslow, and Reedfield, just to get different types of programs. But the students who looked at it calculated that overall for the state, the state could save $1.2 million annually if we were all separating our food scraps from our trash. And then in terms of CO2 emissions, we could reduce that as well. So part of the benefit. This shows you, Mark was talking about the signage that we have, and the big thing about contamination, and really in the programs that we were running, it's not a problem because it's become very simple. Our signage on the one side says yes, on the other side says no. And yes is food. That's as simple as it is. Food and only food. And everything that's on the no side is all the things that people have been confused about forever. Oh, food wrappers? No. Compostable ware? No. Pizza boxes? No. Like, if it's not food, it can't go in. And so that really reduces your whole confusion, because the first minute you say to somebody, you can put, even coffee filters. I think we show coffee grounds without the filters because people are like, oh, coffee filter, well, that's paper. Maybe I can put paper towels. Oh, if I can put paper towels, maybe I can put bottles. Maybe, so the next thing you know, you have contamination. So we have heard so much positive feedback on this that one, like Portland was very worried about contamination in their drop-off sites, and they have not seen it because these signs are at every location. And we also explain the circular food system. We explain that there are nutrients and energy in the food that needs to go around into your compost and then come back to the farm. Nobody wants to see a dirty diaper, go into the and come back to the farm. So when you kind of explain to people how it works, that also helps cut down on your contamination problem.
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
So at home, we look at these Keurig coffee cups. That has to be one of the worst things going for the environment right now. So we start looking around alternatives. One that my wife bought says commercially compostable. Now, I assume that's derived from some sort of hemp alternative or something like that. But what does that mean, commercially compostable?
Yes, so that is an excellent question. And that's why we say no compostable ware, because something like that is, that compostable stuff, and I just learned this from the researchers on our team, it's actually, it might start with something like corn or made out of wheat or bamboo or whatever, some like natural plant. But if one of two things happens, either the way that they put it together uses microplastics, so somehow they think they don't have to count it because it's like microplastic, but that's what's holding it together. Or they said the other way they do it is they process that natural material in such a way that it actually becomes almost indestructible. So they put it under such heat or such pressure that you actually change the composition of the started off as natural material into something that really doesn't break down. So, and the way they get around it is that commercially, okay, under some circumstance that thing might break down, but probably not under most. And so again, we have a problem here. We've been trying to work with the school systems a little bit about the compostable ware that they were using during the pandemic. And we were saying to them, don't spend the extra on the compostable ware because actually it's not, it's just going into the trash like everything else. And so, it's sorry to say, but you might as well just keep using the plastic forks and other things because it's not any better.
Commercially compostable means that within 180 days, in a standard leaching yard or other community-based compost system, where it reaches 160-degree temperatures, it will break down. So that is not a traditional home compost bin, and most likely not many community-based compost systems either. And just to add a fine point to it, I put compostable ware in the Hatch Hill landfill piles, which we did 160, and stay that way for 6 weeks. And I let it plates and cups did disappear, but I can see fragments of them in the compost. The forks and knives just bent, and then it did not go away.
More concerning to me is the study that came out, I read out recently over the last couple of years about the makeup of microplastics actually found in people's
Yeah.
bloodstream.
Yes, yes, and that's what I was gonna say. What
Right,
Mark
plus
said-
PFAS, it was in there too.
Yes.
I was a sanitary district trustee, so I'm all too familiar with all that.
Yeah.
No, and that's, so from a visible eye, that's what you could see, but that's what our researchers say, and I think a lot of they've been doing the research on those, is that the microplastics are not visible, but just like we finally figured out about PFAS, and on the team, we were saying from the Mitchell Center, from the university, there's gonna be PFAS problems, you've gotta stop putting that food wrapper stuff in there because we've been testing it and it keeps showing up these high levels and you've got to stop it. So that's the same thing we're trying to say now about these microplastics. You might not be measuring for them now, they might be not readily apparent to you, but as soon as people start testing for it, you're gonna find out that the levels are much higher and what we don't want in our system. So that's why food and only food.
So this cup we're drinking now is slightly deceiving where it stays 100% compostable.
Yeah.
Right on.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
It should say biodegradable, which is true.
Thank you for answering that.
Yeah, sure, no, it's a great question, that's what I'm saying, we'd love to get the questions. So this is just, I think some takeaways that there's different setups, like different real world setups, this is in Waterville, and how they collect there. And, each of the communities over the year that we piloted them, this is Winslow, have either broken even or saved money, depending on how high of a level of participation. And there's another, this is just solution 6, but if you looked at the education, you would see that the communities that did the most educational tool, used the most of our tools, did the social media, did the brochures, did the activities and events, those are the communities that have the highest levels of participation, and therefore they're the communities that are saving the most money. These are some brochures. This is available to all of you today on our website, so any community can use the materials, but we love to do more pilots, and so we've been talking with, Mike and Brian and Lisa about, if Kennebunk wants to move in this direction.
Kennebunk board.
Yes, that we would be happy to help you implement some of these things. This is those results showing who did what and, how to get started. So anyway, that's basically the presentation. So any questions, any thoughts, any concerns? I mean, what do you see as a challenge to the community?
I just got a couple for you. You mentioned Waterville, Winslow, Portland. Where is that compost going? Are they processing it locally?
So in the case of Portland, they were it was being picked up by We Compost, and then they were taking it up to Auburn and processing the compost there, but then the compost was purchased by AgriCycle, so I think now it's going up to Exeter. In the case of Waterville, they were already always, because they're, what's convenient about AgriCycle is wherever there's a Hannaford, that AgriCycle trucks are coming to that Hannaford to pick up there. So if your community is close to a Hannaford, then the cost for AgriCycle to stop, so Waterville was one of those, they had a lot of Hannafords, and so the cost to get somebody to stop and pick up their collected food waste was lower. So they are also, and then Winslow, right across the river, was the same case. Actually, Winslow, and I'm sorry that Ellen left, because Winslow was an interesting one. Not only were they they weren't that close to a Hannaford, but what they did have is they were already having AgriCycle pick up at their school. And they were just at the middle school, they had 15 dumpsters, 15 of those green toters a week being picked up from the school. And so for that reason, they were already having AgriCycle stop in their community. Their same public works director paid the bill for the school food waste as for the town food waste, and they were really looking to consolidate the community's food waste with the school so that they could get an even lower cost per ton on both of them, and which was really a good idea and very achievable. And they were going to even go beyond the middle school to actually have the high school. They kind of have a pod where all their schools are kind of in the same area. So they were looking at having all the schools divert their food waste, and then maybe even having a drop-off site near the school for the community, so that it would be one location, one stop, the cheapest sort of transportation footprint, and the maximum amount of food waste collected at that one site. So that's why Winslow, it's good that you asked about that. And Reedfield is a totally different one where they are actually making compost at their transfer station. And their model is a little bit what Mark was just saying. They took, Reedfield is combined with Wayne and Fayette, and their one transfer station services those 3 communities. So they are able to get the food scraps now from the 3 communities all collected at Reedfield, all to make compost at that site and then share it back with those communities.
Great. Yeah, I guess it'd be a good appropriate time now to mention, I mean, that's very similar to the model that Kennybunk has now. You know, we do have a consolidated collection center at our transfer station. It is regional. We do have a pay and throw program that obviously not rolled out what the bags are and contentious topic. But we do have a pay and throw subcommittee that Lisa actually serves on. So that's something we do have to help it. We do have a contract. It was with CPRC, we composted, it is now with AgriCycle. So we are doing some of these things. Obviously, everything can be improved upon. But I think the foundation is there right now. We are doing some things, certainly in Kennybunk right now. So that's, you know, a lot better.
Yeah, no, it's terrific, and that's why I think, you know, the goal then is how do we increase the participation, and so, I mean, maybe that's a pretty good segue to have Lisa Pellegrino from CET, the Center for Eco-Technology, who has, because your town is already doing this work, the question was how can we get more businesses and large food waste generators to add to our tonnage, and so, because you do have actually a big hospitality industry, so CET is actually a nonprofit that got a grant to help communities with this sort of challenge. They have a lot of experience throughout the country, having worked with in other places with large food waste generators. So, you know, we invited them. The DEP was happy to have some help.
She's on right after you, so why
Yes.
don't we take a break?
Oh, that's right. You're supposed to like eat something.
All right.
Take a break. But anyway, that's what having an interaction is.
Porta potties.
All right, right on.
King of Compost. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. My name is Lisa Pellegrino, and I'm a business recycling specialist at the Center for Eco-Technology. Before I get anything, very, very grateful for this opportunity to come here at Kennybunk. Maine magic started as soon as I got off the Amtrak at Wells, by having Ride Maine just magically show up, as the lift was definitely not going to come. So this has been very special, and the town of Kennybunk, you know, Mike Pardue, the other Lisa P. Actually, I'm the other Lisa P. That is the Lisa P. I'm the other Lisa P. And yeah, this is just such an honor. And then, you know, Susan, with the University of Maine, my colleague Corey has been working a lot with Susan, and I'm very excited to share the work that we do. So, without further ado, I'm going to just tell you kind of what I'm going to go over. Then I'm going to go over it, and then I'm going to tell you what I went over, because that's what I learned. Is that's how you give a good presentation. You tell them what you're going to tell them, then you tell them, then you tell them what you told them. Real quick, actually, I wanted to just share a little bit more about me, because that's important, right? I'm a certified geek. I've been studying, you know, trash and waste reduction elimination for over 10 plus years, formally, informally. So that's why, like, seeing Mark King of Compost over here do his thing, I'm just like, yes, this is amazing. I love, so fun fact, I love fun facts, and fun fact, if you Google Lisa P. Compost jingle, it came. You'll find a little song I wrote for a class I had on innovation. That's another thing I love about working in this. I just think it's such a creative process, right? It's like almost alchemy to do what we're all doing. So I'm going to give a brief overview of CET. We'll go to the food recovery hierarchy. Probably not, we already did that. And then I'll talk about our wasted food solutions program, and share some case studies of businesses we've worked with, some tips and resources, and opportunities for collaboration. So then we've got our overview of the Center for Eco-Technology, abbreviated as CET, which you probably already picked up on, but just so you know, officially it is the Center for Eco-Technology. So we're an environmental nonprofit that has actually been around for over 45 years, and we work to reduce waste and save energy. And some of the ways that we do that are through our work in residential and commercial energy efficiency. We also work on high performance buildings, a whole other part of
of CET, and then also through our Leadership in Wasted Food Solutions program. We also administer statewide recycling assistance programs. How is my volume and my articulation? I want to make sure. Okay, cool. What is the Wasted Food Solutions program? So essentially, you can think of it as like we're a matchmaker and consultant. So we advise businesses and help them navigate the ever-expanding marketplace of service providers and solution providers, whether it's haulers, processors, recyclers, food rescue organizations. And something to note, though, is that we are not a service provider. So while we're not a food rescue organization, composter, et cetera, we are able to provide tailored recommendations to businesses and match those with surplus to those that can either reduce it, rescue, or recycle it, and provide that personalized support. You can see the impact we've had since 2013 with the Wasted Food Solutions program. Similar to Susan's slide, partnership is everything here, right? This is critical to making impact happen. So thank you to Maine DEP, the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection, the EPA, the USDA, and the many others supporting our work throughout the Northeast. It really, truly is a collaborative effort, and it's kind of like my favorite saying, like, none of us are as smart as all of us. I really think it's going to take collaboration to get where we got to go. Another favorite expression of mine, even better, kind of articulates the point, is if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. One of the ways that we have actually been already doing work in Maine is that we've helped hundreds of businesses throughout the Northeast, but in Maine, set up and maintain mercury thermostat recycling and fluorescent lamp drop-off areas. So we work closely with the Maine DEP to help plan out site visits and set up these drop-off locations. Like you see at Maine Hardware in Portland. Another area that we've worked in Maine and also in Portland, and this is an area that I just love trying to learn about because it's so dense, but I don't know if anybody here is familiar with the passive house certification. It is literally the most energy efficient building standard in the market today. So CET also assists with inspection and verification of multiple passive house projects in Portland, and most of those are affordable housing, that are for older adults or people with disabilities. And just some of the principles of passive house I just wanted to quickly share, like solar orientation and energy recovery ventilation. Really, really cool, exciting stuff. Fun fact, we also, Center for Eco Technology, operates the largest building material, reclaimed building material store in the Northeast called Eco Building Bargain Store. So we accept donations of quality building materials and sell them to the public at discounted prices. Customers love the unique styles. I'm sure we've all been thrifting, right? It's you get unique style, quality, and value of these reclaimed pieces, and so we work with homeowners and contractors to prevent these perfectly good building supplies and materials from going to landfills, while also making home improvement more affordable, more accessible to more people. And we also have worked with Maine DEP in helping promote deconstruction as a viable alternative to demolition. So hopefully a lot more there. I'm going to breeze through these next few slides. Who knows the 3 R's? Come on, it's my engagement piece. Appease me, please.
Reuse.
Reuse. Recycle. Excellent. And then I was looking it up. The EPA had come up and built on this, right? Coming up with this food recovery hierarchy. I won't, go in it because we've kind of thoroughly have gone in depth. I guess the one thing I do want to share is just about, compost, hearing Mark King talk about it so in depth, knowing Mr. Fox is here. I'm sure there are many others working in the room, even hearing the questions about home composting. It really is like clicking these things, and farmers have been doing this for millennia, right? Because it's literally them displacing, an external cost otherwise, and it builds up soil health, and which builds up our health, which is a virtuous cycle, and it really plays into what I like to call the flavor nutrition connection, right? How many of you have tasted something that you could tell, was delicious, but probably more nutritious too, because of all that beautiful microbial community in the soil? So we're not going to go over this either. We already touched on this. But I think one maybe point that wasn't touched on, $165 billion valuation for all this. And this is definitely one of the reasons why I am so passionate about working at what I like to call the food waste hunger paradox, right? It's kind of paradoxical that we have a society where things go to waste and people go hungry simultaneously. And I know that's why we're all here, so I'm not going to keep going, because this is where, here we are, the choir. Don't want to preach. But so the Center for Eco Technology, one of the mantras that we have that I love is about meeting you where you are. Wherever you are in your sustainability journey, we are going to meet you there. And one of the ways that we do that and that is providing, and we can do this in Maine, is no cost waste reduction assistance, right? So we will go to businesses or schools and we will do we'll evaluate existing waste streams and do a no cost waste reduction assessment. And then we develop, after the visit, we develop a customized report, so a list of kind of what are the opportunities we see here, identifying opportunities to prevent, recover, or otherwise divert food scraps from the landfill, and then based on whichever measures on that report you want to implement, we work with you to implement those recommendations. So we also can help with creating customized waste and recycling bin signage and staff training. Because it doesn't have, patience, yes, but I think it can be fun, right? That's what I'm all about. And receive no cost waste assistance today, yes. So one of the ways that we have been able, to be in Maine and through partnership is with Susan and her incredible work on this Big Six. And so, the George Mitchell Center for Sustainability Solutions is piloting several really exciting strategies, and we're grateful and excited to be working with Susan and her students on supporting these emerging solutions to Maine's efforts to reduce, rescue, and recycle wasted food. Now I'm going to share some case studies or success stories of businesses that we've worked with. So Jungle Gyms, this is actually a grocer out in Ohio with 2 locations, and for over 35 years they've already had this. I walk into supermarkets and I'm like, why don't all supermarkets have a reduced deal section, right? But so this is, an area where they have produce, deli, meat, and bakery items that are sold at a discounted rate, and so this, adds value to customers, and it obviously reduces waste and captures what was formerly lost revenue. So it's such a win-win-win. And we were working with Jungle Gyms to further their own sustainability efforts by identifying and actually repurposing packaging. So they have these empty pickle buckets in their deli section, and we worked with Earth Peak Organics to have them repurposed and reused for a household food scrap recycling program that's happening in that area. So just another kind of fun way to make sure things are staying out. Hingham High School in Massachusetts, so CET staff, we support K-12 schools through the Green Team, which is actually sponsored by the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection. So at Hingham High, they were inspired by the lesson plans that the Green Team had put out, because they were very much, the Hingham High very much has this emphasis on, an educational component to composting and reducing waste, right? Not just like doing it, but how can we embed this into the curriculum? So there's student volunteers that have formed green teams. They help sort the materials at lunch and inspect barrels for contamination. After lunch, they move the food scraps from the cafeteria to the compost. Hingham High has also transitioned their styrofoam trays to compostable ones, and that's actually used as the Browns feedstock for their on-site composting system. Hingham diverts about half a ton of food waste per month, and they're saving money by doing it. This is one of my favorites, so Apponaug Brewing Company in Warwick, Rhode Island. I don't know if anybody's been to Rhode Island. If you are, definitely recommend heading there. So they already, my understanding now, if you're opening up a brewery in the year 2022, you already know where your spend grains are going, because it's just such a win-win, right? But so they already, when we worked with them, had prevention very much on their mind, was very high up. So the owner in the summer of 2021, Tamara, began working closely with her kitchen staff, and she started seeing kind of firsthand all the food waste that was going, particularly the French fries. So she gave her this idea to launch this experiment. Let me just start putting them in a clear plastic tub, just to people, so that the staff can see and they can start tracking how much of the fries were just going to waste. And that actually launched this whole initiative to reduce portion size. That's just one of the things they do, but then they keep going. They have a share shelf for employees, which I've seen, you promote too, this idea of a share table. I think that's an awesome way to help show your people you care about them, being resourceful, making sure that people have infrastructure to share things. They also, one of the things about the fry waste experiment, which was fascinating, is that not only did they see a reduction in fries wasted when they reduced the portion size, they also saw a reduction in the takeout containers they were using. But they're doing all kinds of, innovative, creative stuff. They're using like arugula that's maybe on its way out, upcycling that into pesto. They have this and then they're taking other ingredients that maybe are like perfectly good quality for a salad, but they have a soup program, right? So they've empowered the chefs to really get creative with menu recipe development, and they'll upcycle these ingredients into soups, of course with some beer to make it tasty, and they also make their own stocks. I don't know if anybody in here does that. I do it at home. You just take your veg cuttings and you put them in a freezer bag, and you make, if anybody's buying veggie broth, talk to me after this, okay? We gotta talk. Yeah.
I want to make a plug for Maine's own Wild Oats Market in Brunswick. We actually have a video of her on our Food Rescue Maine website where she is going through her kitchen and showing how she does exactly what you're talking about, and how everybody in their home kitchen can, the leftover bread becomes the croutons. They make smoothies, they sell smoothies there, and use up all, almost on its way out fruits and vegetables. So we have it right here in Maine, so if you'd like to see a Mainer talking about how they do this, you can go on the
There you
website.
go.
Love it. Thank you, Susan. Yeah, absolutely.
Wild Oats, and cafes.
And so, I love all these examples because it's essentially, how you could be learning a lot by experimenting, while also getting creative and doing this all for free and maybe even saving money in the process. Food waste prevention, as I've touched on, it's something, we have several resource documents available on our Wasted Food Solutions website for businesses, and this will provide guidance on everything from food donation, and how to set up collection for food scraps in your kitchen, source separation. My personal fave is prevention, it's the highest up on the hierarchy, and the business case is right there, like I mentioned with Appanog. And it also helps avoid paying for food twice, right? Because you buy the food and then now you have to pay to get rid of the food. So another easy example of source reduction could just be like leaving potato skins on fries. Things can be really simple. CET has worked with some organizations that have great source reduction techniques that are quite simple. So there was a hotel that changed their buffet trays from a depth of 4 inches just to 2 inches. Right, so that everything looks full and more appealing. Oh, and then the food isn't getting wasted because it's not sitting out as long. UMass of Amherst, they repurposed their pineapple cores and their cucumber trimmings into fancy water. And I believe the University of Maine is also piloting a lot of exciting initiatives on source reduction and food waste prevention. I'm coming around the bend here. I know that sustainability and waste reduction goals, it's good for the environment, but yes, it is good for business too. As more people are becoming sustainability minded, I think diverting food scraps and being a good steward of resources, right, is just a way to attract not only new customers but new employees as well, retain employees. There was a study done by Cone Communications that saw that 51% of employees won't work for a company that doesn't have strong social or environmental commitments. And 74% of employees say their job is more fulfilling when they're provided with opportunities to make a positive impact on social and environmental issues, right? So I just think with all the staffing challenges that many have been facing, working towards and clearly communicating these waste reduction goals is a way to have a sustainable competitive advantage from other employers. This is the Wasted Food Solutions website page. Offers a wealth of information on state-specific resources. So it's a screenshot of the main page, and look at that. Who's at the top of that list? It's the University of Maine's George Mitchell Center for Sustainability Solutions, and You can also find a bunch of other case studies. There's a toolbox of those resource documents that I mentioned. Listed on our website, there's also a hotline email and phone number that you can contact to ask questions about wasted food or request a free waste reduction assessment so we can collaborate and accomplish shared goals. It's very much a favorite of mine. It's just uniting and what's our shared goal here. So I talked a little bit about the an overview of CET, food recovery hierarchy, which we all know through and through now, right? And our waste and food solutions program. Share with you a few case studies and some tips and resources, opportunities for collaboration. I'm hoping that we can talk and find ways to work together. And I really love the workshop component of this. So I'm hoping there is time for interactive discussion. Thank you again so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
I have a question for you, Lisa.
Yes, Lisa.
So how do businesses find you to help do their assessments? Like, I know I can tell local Kennebunk businesses about you, but what if I miss a business, or there's a business out there that might be interested in food waste recycling? What do they do? I know that's sort of a broad question, but
I mean, there's still so many different ways to go about it, right? You can go to our website, so we have the hotline and the email for, to kind of reach, our staff. I have business cards here. I actually walked around downtown Kennebunk yesterday, handed out some rack cards and my business cards.
awesome.
Yeah, and I know you did a bunch of outreach too, so that's a part of what we do. It's just like letting it be know what we do. So we have our website, and then there's that kind of like passive. You can come to us, or we're always trying to like get the word out there as well.
Yeah,
Hopefully, does that answer your question?
I would just add to that, I mean, the simple way is, if you contact the Mitchell Center, because really CT's in Massachusetts, and the way that they have come here is because we partner with them and specifically want their additional expertise on the business side. So they really have a lot of experience, and so if we can handle the full range of questions. So if you say, look, we have a business, I can say, I know just the people to partner you up with, and we can make sure, and not, because sometimes the connections just kind of end up dead.
Right.
Once you kind of include us, we can also follow up to make sure that that connection really got made and that something happened with it. So that's why I might suggest just that additional, benefit. And plus, it allows us to sort of oversee for Maine what's going on here, and that,
Plus, if DEP's involved, we need to know what's going on.
Yep,
so that
yep,
we can.
Yep, yeah, so we like to, Maine wants to sort of make sure that we're, so it's good to come, and we, like I said, we welcome
Well,
the
we're
resource.
responsible to you, you pay my salary. I want to make sure that I know you're getting the right service.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, my name is Mike Parker, and we've been with DEP for 30 years, and we're everyone's favorite part of the presentation, the regulation side. That said, we try to keep this part as light as possible. Everyone in our group wants your organics collection programs to be successful. We do not want you to have problems, because you're going to get the phone calls, I'm going to get the phone calls. So the common theme this morning has all been, manage your problems up front so that you don't get those phone calls at 4 o'clock on a Friday afternoon in a hot summer day. So that's the purpose of the registration program that I'm going to run through today. The other half of my program is I'm going to give you the 30,000-foot view of how to site and not quite operate a compost site. There are others that are more well-versed in that, but Mark asked us just to touch around the edges and give you a feel for what can be involved if you want to site and operate a compost facility as well. So with that, there are several names up on there. Any one of those up on that list can help you with getting your site registered, deal with the day-to-day questions, that kind of thing. So we're here as a resource. So as Mark stated earlier this morning, he got into a little bit of trouble with his let's call it the progressive ideas of collection sites. And in a black and white interpretation, even your small kiosk could be required to be licensed as a transfer station. And nobody in our group wanted to do that. But the other side is, we wanted to know where these things are, what you're doing. And it's all in the vein of, we want to help you, because people call up and say, hey, where can I take my organics? And we can ask them, okay, what town do you live in? And say, look, they've got 3 kiosks located at this location, that one, and that location. And, we can help your program become successful, and we can help get your information out into the world as well. So that's why we wanted to do this. Organics collection can happen at a bunch of different sites. If you have an existing transfer station, you can easily, and you've got the real estate, you can incorporate that into there. The people are coming there with their trash anyway. So why don't you give them a one-stop shopping location, and they can sort out their organics and also deal with their trash and recycling. We try to keep this as simple as possible for your residents. You can have a standalone collection site just for organics. But again, if it's going to be fairly sized, it's going to have to be a separate license under our 402 regulations. And that gets us to our last one, our standalone kiosks. We do not want these to be licensed. And they're meant to be very small. I think it's like 6 yards total collection capacity, which is a lot. You can put a lot of, 6 yards of waste is pretty good. Think of it as like 6 washing machines all lined up together. And with the smaller facilities, you can be more flexible. How many you need to have throughout your communities. So that's the kind of process there. This is what we're envisioning. This picture has gotten a lot of use today, but this is a perfect example of what everyone envisions when we say kiosk. It's got your signage, you've got your containers, it's out of the way, but it's still highly visible. You've got your roof, you've got your enclosed containers. So let's get into some of the nuts and bolts. We want you to have written permission of the property owner, because in some cases it might be owned by Walmart, but it might be run by somebody else. So you've got 2 different entities there that are involved with this. We want to know if the property owner has given you permission to set this up. Have to have some of the things we talked about already this morning, a contractual agreement with someone to come and collect your organics. You want them to be visible and easy for use for your consumers. And educational signage. Keep it simple. Food, yes. Trash, no. TVs, no. Dirty diapers, no. It's all, the themes are very common throughout this morning. Must be covered for protection against precipitation and vectors. Containers have tight fitting lids. Service frequently. You have a lot of seasonality in some of your communities, especially on the coast. And you're going to have certain food waste that you're going to want to have removed at a more frequent cycle. We're looking for at least once per week, certainly more frequently during the warm weather. But you're going to figure out what your flow through is. If you only have 2 containers and they're fairly small, the 30-gallon ones we talked about, you may need to move either to bigger containers, or have more containers, or have them service more frequently. And that may well adjust during the seasonality of the year once it's touristy. Mark mentioned compostable absorbent material in the bottom for leachate and odor control. Mark likes to say no kitty litter. Kitty litter does not compost. You are not allowed to do on-site washing, so what we're looking for, if you have somebody servicing the site, they swap out. You might bring in a clean container and leave you the clean one, take the dirty one, or if they're just using a tipper, they just might swab it out on a regular basis, and just as opposed to trying to. What we don't want you is washing them there with a garden hose and having to empty out that water that's going to be collecting at the bottom. You are going to get, some excluded materials. There are going to be people that are going to want what we call wish cycling. They're going to bring things, oh yes, this can definitely be composted. And it's not something you're going to want in that bin. So again, this is where your signage, your education comes into play. But you're going to have some of those things show up and just have, this will be part of the periodic maintenance, get those things out of there. Like we talked about, was it Garbage to Gardens or one in Portland? They put the little notes in the bin there and said, this is nice, but we don't want these in our bin. So we appreciate your efforts, but no thanks. Keep it free and clean of litter. We're hoping you're not going to be closing them, but if you've got one set up at a site that's not working, and you've got a different site where you've got more traffic, more accessible, then certainly close it up and find another, set up a new location. So it's all pretty common sense stuff.
Scrolling up.
No, that's it, I just need to scroll down. So this is the form we're talking about, the registration form. We have this available on several web pages within DEP. This is a fill-in-the-blank PDF document. You put in all your data, you save it, and then just email it back to us. So this is what we talked about, the entity operating the facility. So this might be Garbage Gardens, Scrap Dogs, any one of those facilities, those companies. This is the person that owns the property, which again, if you were setting this up at Walmart, setting up at the Public Works, it's going to be that kind of thing. And then just a brief description, want to know the physical address, the size and quantity, who's going to be receiving your collected organics, methods for controlling odors, the operating requirements we talked about, keep it neat, keep it clean, have a contract for someone to come and clean things up, remove your organics. That's the email address that you'll send the form back to, and that's it's an email list, so there's like 10 people on that list, but the person that's within your geographic area are probably going to be Eric Hamlin for this area. He'll get a copy of this, and he'll get a response back to you. Thanks for your registration. Because the other thing I'm going to do is we're building a database where all these organic collection sites are. People can access that too. So again, it's our part to help get your word out there that you guys are doing good things, and people can find a kiosk. So again, we're just trying to get that information out. There is an annual reporting requirement, which again, it's not to become onerous, but to help you with data collection. So again, you can get the message out there. Look, we collected, in the past year, we collected 20 tons of food scraps that was diverted from the landfill and saved us X amount of dollars. So again, we want your program to be successful. We'll be using generically your information to help get the word out there. You guys are doing great work. So that's about it on the form.
Who's responsible for that form? Is it the operator or the property owner?
Both. Worst case scenario, we get a phone call 4 o'clock in information. We get a complaint at 4 o'clock on a Friday afternoon. I'm going to call, there's 2 different contacts on there. If Public Works owns the property, I'm going to start with you first. We get a rotting pile of seafood waste sitting there. You're going to call whoever's picking up your stuff and say, we need to get this out of here. But that's not going to happen. But it is a good question.
Just to follow up on that, so we have bins at our transfer station.
Yep.
If we were to expand to another site or something, that would be the town's responsibility, correct? So we
Yep.
would have to do
Yeah,
this.
and that's when that registration form would kick in. If you're already doing it at your transfer station, that's already incorporated in the operations manual for the transfer station, and it's licensed. So this form is just for those standalone little kiosks. So a whole separate process for that.
What's been your, what's the history on some of these kiosks that are not at a transfer station? You mentioned the Walmart parking lot.
Yep.
Is there other places in the history of these that are more successful than others? Should it be town land elsewhere? Certain kind of signage? What's been the problems, like you mentioned, putting non-organics in these things? How is that dealt with?
Making it as easy and convenient for your users as possible. High traffic areas, you're going to get more customers coming through there. Our biggest thing has been the inappropriate materials. That's been our biggest problem. I've had people, we used to have a similar situation in my town in Manchester. We used to have the Eagle Main silver bullets. We had people bringing in TVs,
you name it, and then we try to throw those in there. Because it's, it's all recycling, it's all good. The TVs get glass and plastic and metal, it can all be recycled. It's like, no. So that's been our biggest problem, is inappropriate materials.
How did the Manchester situation, how was that solved? What did you
They
do?
took our silver bullet away. So I now have to take my, I have a private hauler that comes to my house to get my stuff. Or I can use the landfill in Augusta. But that's because I'm proactive and take care of these things. But for other people, they're like, nope, I'm not going to recycle. So.
Really quick though, we find that signage is critical. The green garbage to garden kiosks that had the 2 containers that had all that signage, it tells what's positive, what's not positive. It tells the story of how to do it. So signage is critical. Education is critical.
Yeah.
The pilot projects that Suzanne and I are working on all have really appropriate signs. Yes, no. And that's what happens. But we
You're going to
also,
find what the problems are in the first couple of months, and that's when you get back to, you're going to have your web page saying, for your kiosk that says, hey, this is working out great. We've got a few things that we all need to work on. Without pointing out anything, but here's an example of inappropriate materials that have been showing up. So that's the kind of thing that's been problematic.
Can I just share the Portland experience? They were also worried with their community collection sites. They have 5 of them, and they cited them all. The first one's at Community Gardens, and they have now expanded to additional locations. They were worried, but they haven't had the problem because of the signage. Also, kind of high traffic, you're right, is good for accessibility. It's also good for like discouraging people from, doing inappropriate
the midnight
things.
dumpers.
And if you think about Portland with the amount, homeless people and, people on the streets, that's why they were so concerned about, how might these things be used. So one of the other things they did is they always put a garbage container where they have the green bins for pickup, and that has really, and like I said, the culmination of it is that it's worked out so well that they have actually just expanded to more locations. And not Garbage Garden, but AgriCycle, we really did press them because I know Mark was very concerned at the beginning that we have unmanned drop-off locations because there was the feeling that there would be trouble. But I think that AgriCycle says something like, well, they were thinking the same thing, but now 95%, I think, of their sites are unmanned. They're just drop-off sites, and they operate fine. So, I think that people over time, maybe there was some trouble at the beginning, but
Just initially, but once you get things rolling, that problem just goes away. So again, it's your signage, your education. People know a good thing when they see it, and they want to keep it going.
A quick question. So I oversee a number of transfer stations in southern and mid-Maine that deal with a lot of residential drop-off. If we were to expand, into the organics collection beyond what the kiosk, what are the regulations there as far as like stormwater and you have to apply for permits for that? If it gets beyond just like a kiosk.
Once you get beyond the kiosk, you're definitely going to get into the permitting realm.
Yeah.
If it's small enough, you can qualify for our reduced procedures permitting process, but you're going to have to meet setbacks from property boundaries, from residences, protected natural resources like wetlands. So it can get a little complicated.
Is food waste like regulation similar to solid waste as far as that stuff?
Yeah, Mark's going to want to plug his ears, but the regs don't make a distinction between your bag of trash from your kitchen and the food scraps. It's all solid waste.
but if he does it in one of his transfer stations, he can do an ops manual.
Yeah, he's talking about a separate standalone.
Yeah,
But
it
at
would.
the transfer station, correct?
What's that?
You say you manage transfer station.
Yep.
You're talking about setting up a
Would this
large.
be at an existing transfer station?
Correct.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's easy enough.
That's
Easy enough.
better.
As long as, that's better.
Yeah. I
As long
have
as you're staying
6 of
within
them
the
around
existing
here.
footprint, like the original footprint of the transfer station, you're just kind of carving out a little area, and we would just ask you to update your operations manual, basically.
Do you prefer that it need to be inside a facility, or is open?
At the very least, it would have to be covered, and that could be
Yeah.
just like a pole barn.
Yeah.
that would work.
Okay.
But, inside is always better,
Yeah.
main windows. So whatever works for you, but at the very least, you're gonna have some sort of a roof structure.
Perfect,
Yeah,
thank
we
you.
can definitely work with you on that.
That's good.
A quick question for you, actually, you touched on briefly there, as a way to limit interpretation, but in regards to setbacks, protecting natural resources, I believe it's a 100-foot setback in
Right.
forest and wetland right now. Now, to me, that it would just seem like that's going to pose a problem for some municipalities in southern Maine and private businesses, because there's more and more land being built on, obviously, these things within close proximity. So are there systems that you could look at to install to reduce that setback if it was accomplishing the goal of not polluting that resource, or has the department not explored that?
We definitely take that into consideration. There are provisions for you to request a variance to those setbacks, and we would look at, okay, which is the lesser of two evils? Impacting 220 square feet of a forested wetland, which we've got a lot of, which is offset by increasing organics collection. Those are things we take into consideration. So you can request a variance and use that language says, look, yes, we're going to have wetland impacts, but the offset to that is we're collecting 20% of our MSW, and that is now going into composting. So those are things that we would take into consideration.
Well, that was sort of my thought, was how do you balance that? Obviously, there's a climate need to remove this stuff from solid waste, and force it up, and it seems like that would be lesser of two evils, so to speak.
Absolutely.
Well, what some folks do too is they'll say, we want a variance, but we're gonna build a containment area. So any stormwater will be contained and treated as opposed to being discharged. That shows that you're meeting the rule halfway, and as a result, that's something that Mike would also consider. So, and that's important.
Thank you.
Watch this, look at that. All right, 30,000-foot view of composting. This is where my disclaimer is. These are all people that work in the permitting and compliance side for composting facilities. So any one of them is going to give you, help you out with your siting and permitting questions. Like I said, I'm just here to give you the 30,000-foot view, but these are the experts.
I was a former regulator, and I helped write the rules, but I'm not allowed to talk about them because I'm a educator. And I don't do any regulations, so they keep me away from that.
You just talk now and then, though.
Yes, I'll still give you compost advice.
So, chapter 410 is where our composting regulations live. We have a certain short list of exempt composting facilities. And then we have 4 types of applications: pilot projects, PBR, permit by rule, for leaving yard waste, reduced procedures, and then general permit. And I'll run through all 4 of those one order. Pilot projects are just that. If you've got some unique thing that you want to investigate, try out, test run, this is where that proposal would fit in. You come to us and say, look, this is what I want to do. I want to do this for a limited duration. I want to evaluate this new composting technology. This is where we would put you in those permitting categories. It's meant to be limited duration, short in scope, but it gives you the latitude to figure out, okay, can this work at this level or scaled up to a larger level? Reduced procedures is our next category. It's limited in the types of materials that you can bring in for composting. And we just had that conversation about requesting variances. If you're going under the reduced procedures, you have to meet all those setbacks. You can't request a variance that 100% setback from properties, from wetlands, from residences. You have to have all that stuff all squared away. And then these are our setbacks: 100 foot from landfill, not 100 feet floodplain, 100 foot from protecting natural resources, from wells, property boundaries. Depending on the type of aircraft, it's either 10,000 or 5,000 foot setback.
I thought it was 500 for wells.
That's a water supply, public water supply.
Yeah.
Again, these are like the construction and operational requirements, depending on which type of composting materials, residuals you're bringing in. You've got to have your stormwater controls, odor controls, and the pathogen and vector control sets all in. General permit is our largest permitting category. It's only slightly more onerous than the review procedures, but it gives you more flexibility. This is where you could request a variance to, protecting natural resources or private wells or residents, that kind of thing. So it gives you and us as the regulators more flexibility in the permitting process. And there are, once you get your permit, there are going to be some operating requirements you're going to have to deal with. Annual reports. You're going to get, I wouldn't say frequent inspections from us, but you'll see us probably once a year. Hopefully not more frequent than that. But don't hesitate to invite us out there. If you're running into such problems, we're here to help you fix those problems. And if we don't know, we're going to call Mark and send him out there. So. Not going to talk too much about the element requirements, but there are some certain ways where you want to have analytical requirements to make sure that you're dealing with your feedstocks are at the right relationship so that you can produce a marketable material when you're all done with your compost. This is the big one for all of them. Odors, vectors, leachate. Mark said public perception is your reality, especially with all three of these things. Odor, we break it down into four. There are four subcategories: frequency, intensity, duration, and defensiveness. Frequency, how often are there odors coming from your facility? Intensity, is it, you get out of your car and you're like, oh my God. Duration, is it 1 hour during the day? 8 hours during the day? How often? And then offensiveness, when you get out of the car and you throw up in your cat. And we have means of calibrating that. We use what's called the butanol odor test. And basically, it's 6 different jars of chemicals in there, and each staff person gets their nose calibrated to each of those 6 jars. And it standardizes it across the whole scale. So we'll go out there and we'll be standing at the neighbor's house, and we'll have that jar, the first one that says, it's not too bad, not too offensive, all the way up to the 6th jar where it's like, oh my God. And that's how we rate the odor intensities and durations. And once we've got that part, we'll work with you to address those odors. Mark says, when your materials first come through the door, that's your first chance to deal with your odors. If you're dealing with fish waste, you need to find some other amendment to get mixed with that fish waste to get those odors under control right from the beginning. It's easier to catch them up front than literally once they leave the farm. So some things we've talked about, incorporating your stinky waste with waste or other material amendments that can help control those odors. Process control. Do you have enough of your feedstocks on site to manage those odors? Covering the piles with finished compost. Again, these are all different strategies that can help you with your odor issues. You can explain.
Let's say a mixer,
okay.
and they're mixing offensive stuff with good stuff, and you end up with the recipe that can be composted, and all that liquid has been absorbed, so no odor. That's the key, management right away.
Vectors, birds, flies, scum, rodents, it can become an issue for your neighbors. And again, this is all your front-end management strategies. Deal with your odorous feedstocks right from day one, and you're not going to have these things, these kind of problems.
The bad
The bad guys, yes. It all comes down to good housekeeping. Know your feedstocks that you're going to bring in there. If you're going to have sticky seafood waste, again, have your other materials on site to mix in there and deal with them up front. And if you do have an issue, you know, if you think you got squared away, you brought your materials in, you mixed them up, and then a few days later, you start getting odors, this is where your troubleshooting gets into play. Okay, did my pile go from aerobic to anaerobic? And what do I need to do to fix that problem? Are my compost pile temperatures where they need to be? What can I do to fix that problem? So once you become you gotta put a plug in for the main compost school. I'm both a student and a teaching assistant now, is that my title? So, I'm all in. If you've ever dealt with Mark, there's no halfway in, you gotta go all the way. Leachate, if you can compost under a roof, that is a very good thing, because that's gonna be your best management strategy. But you can definitely successfully compost outside without a roof. It all gets into how you manage your piles, are your feedstocks wet, are they dry? So there's some different things you can do. But again, at the end of the day, you do not want a river of brown tea running out the bottom of your pile and running out your neighbor's property. But yeah, these are all things you can do. We talked about some of the issues, the causes, and yeah, we can help you work with you to figure out what you need to fix the issue. Appropriate mixing, you all talked about appropriate mixing, have good feedstocks to help control your. That's a 30,000 foot view. Questions?
Real quick question for you.
Sure.
If we were looking to expand, so our transfer station's already permitted. If we were looking to expand, add a composting facility to that, would the existing operation fall under review related to that permit?
If your scope of your operation is small enough that it fits as an exemption, in the composting regs, we would just ask you just to do like an update to your operations manual. If you're outside of that, you may have to do like a minor revision to your existing permit, to tell us, again, what you're going to do and how you're going to be doing it. And as long as you're not expanding the footprint of the transfer station, you should be able to handle that within a minor revision. But if you're going outside that footprint, you may have to go through an amendment application. The information that we're going to be requesting is going to change. It's just a slightly different permitting process.
You could review the existing operation if you were to expand.
Yep.
That's the next guy that's gonna be a vegetator, he's getting there.
What constitutes needing a permit? So obviously, you can have your own bin in your home.
Yep.
So say we wanted to integrate the schools into maybe being community drop-off centers. Is that, now we're talking about needing a permit if they've got like 2 or 3 toters at the schools?
There are a couple different ways to handle this. We have an exemption in our transfer station rules that says a roll-off container servicing that particular institution is exempt from our rules. So if you had, at the school, for example, if you had a separate roll-off container for all the other trash, and then a separate roll-off container just for, for your organic collection, you might be able to fit into that exemption. You're just having a separate facility, dumpster just for that. If you start getting into a much larger, operation than that, that's probably going to bring you into our permitting requirements. Like I said, separate roll-off container or dumpster just for the school, that would be fine.
But what if residents who,
serves, that's like six yards for that. So there's a couple different ways to do it, either exempt or it's just small enough to go through the registration form we talked about.
gotcha, yep.
Yeah.
I forgot what my other question was.
If residents were gonna.
Young residents.
Oh yeah, and is that acceptable if like the school hosts it, but residents would be dropping off their compost there?
I think we could make that work. Again, as long as they're all still using that same one extra roll-off container or dumpster for, that institution. It gets a little tricky on that one. What?
I think it would work.
I think it still work though.
I mean, I'm
Yeah,
not,
as long as you're, the thing is, don't create problems, so as long as, as soon as it's filled
Right.
up, we want you to economize that too. We want you to fill up the container and get it out to who's ever gonna be doing the collections for you, scrap dogs or whatever. So, we can definitely work with you on that.
so if you are exempt, can you still be on your registry of sites? So if people from Kennybunk call and say, where can I take my organics? Could you say, oh, the school allows you to drop it off there?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay.
We definitely want to
Cool.
get you on the list with that, definitely.
All
That's
right.
what the registration would be.
That's what, that's, from my perspective, that's the whole purpose, that's the ultimate benefit of that registration. So we have that list, there's a collection point here, there's one there, and one over there.
Now, Lisa touched on a good point that probably we should bring up in the future ones, and that is an individual business can have a container behind their facility that handles their stuff, and that's not licensed. And that can then be a consolidated collection point for that business. So then if you have, let's say, 20 businesses in a row, and Casella says, well, I want a milk run, that's 20 milk runs right there. That's a perfect suite for them to then collect, and then they can take it to a processing facility. And all of that definitely is a beneficial thing. Where I have a question for you, Mike, is will that registration process, if we do an individual business, they won't be included on that map, right? It'll just be kiosks that will be included on that.
Yeah, so if someone, someone has to be aggressive enough to call us for sustainability, and say, hey, can we get on your map?
So that means that's something we should do, so that Mike and I
That's
can
on
talk
us.
about us trying to get that set up, because I want all the collection sites to be noted, so we can get an idea of all the places that are being collected, so we can show that as a number.
Yeah.
What happens if the 20 businesses get together and just say, we'll put all our organics in one thing? Do they
Changes.
need to then get registered as a kiosk or something?
Bigger, they'd have to get a license.
Yeah.
Because 6 yards is the max that these kiosks can get. And if you get 20 businesses contributing, they're probably gonna fill a 30-yard roll-off. So it's better to have separate containers per business, because if it's dedicated to that one business, it doesn't require any permitting.
Yeah, but what happens if Casella or some other collector says, I'll do business with you, but you're all next to each other, you're 20 in a row, give me one big container I can come and collect from. Then they're looking for a license where they need one.
I'm thinking we could work something out with Casella where they would pick up each one independently because it's volume. And if they know that the business won't do it, if they all have to get licensed, I think Casella would work on something.
Yeah, so if like it was a business that was generating a large amount of organics, and say they wanted to get a compactor roll-off container, they'd have to get a license for that container for us to haul it to, the end destination.
That's another answer that I know, and I shouldn't tell you because I'm not a regulator, but if a material is being hauled from a business to a site of processing, there's no registration required.
I'm not gonna make a distinction between they have that much volume material and they have both a compactor and a roll-off container they push it into. I'm not gonna split that here. I'm gonna say that's one roll-off container serving that one institution.
Yeah.
That's a good point, but that was made in the non-hazardous waste transport rules, that if you're going from a site of generation to a site of composting, it does not require any sort of special permit.
Yeah, because the reality of it is if they're not doing it right now, we're just hauling it in their other compactor. We're already hauling it.
But seriously, the one about behind the businesses is one that slipped through the cracks, and I'm really glad you brought it up, because Mike and I need to find a way to track that, as Suzanne wants to know that information too, because when we make a map of these sites where food is being collected, if we ignore those, that's a huge piece.
I'm not, are we talking about that the container behind a business would be somewhere that the public could bring?
No, only the
Right.
business.
Only the
But
business.
the deal is that that piece is not going to be tracked by this registration system. The
Yes.
registration system is for kiosks and transfer stations.
Yeah.
So if a business has their own bin that they're collecting organics, that won't be tracked. until we figure out a way to do that. Because it's exempt, it doesn't require a license, so it won't be reported on how much volume was actually taken away.
Yeah, right.
And
It's
we'd like to
important
have
for
that
the-
information. So that's now a void that Mike and I need to figure out how to fill. But I'm glad you brought that up, that's really
You're
cool.
welcome.
Good question.
Mark and Mike, awesome presentation, both of you, and this question's a little more of the, it's not as specific to the town, so please forgive me, but like, I'm still thinking about this pile of shrimp shells that you said reduced to what, like 90%?
All slick, just drops into the ground, yeah.
What happens there and how do we harness that? It makes me think of like ecosystem services, bless you.
It's very putrescible, keep putrescible things. So a C-to-N ratio is what tells me if a project's gonna be stinky or not, and also how quickly it's gonna dissolve. A C-to-N ratio of 15:1 and above is pretty stable. A C-to-N ratio of 5:1 and below is very unstable. And what that means is that it's naturally gonna start to break down and turn into like an organic fluid ooze.
You want like 25 to 30 to 1 ideally.
Well, when we make our compost recipe, that's exactly what we want, because we know it's gonna cook and not go away.
Right.
But in the case of that, anything that's that putrescible is also that smelly. But as far as shrimp go, if you don't deal with them right away, they just dissolve.
Dissolve.
Yeah, they basically just turn into a liquid and it permeates the soil and just goes away in a negative way. As a matter of fact,
It's an opportunity lost, that's for sure.
I won't talk about the Poland Spring side of it, but I had a site in Hollis that for many, many years was composting seafood. This is back when I was regular. And I got called to the site, not because of a compost complaint, but because the neighbor next to them had a brand new Mercedes-Benz, and it looked like a stucco painting from all the seagull turds on it. And I had to see it because I couldn't believe it. When I arrived, it looked just like stucco painting. It was covered head to toe. And I was like, where are all these birds coming from? I drove into the field, and for years, this farmer had been receiving, he said 300 yards of seafood. He was receiving 10,000 yards a year, and he was not composting it. He was building it in piles around his property, and I saw the shrimp piles, and they were nothing but oil slick. And I dug in with a shovel, and the ground was saturated with shrimp goo. and I just, so we shut them down. But when we did that, every processor in the Poland area had nowhere to go, and they lost their minds. And so we created all these compost sites to try and deal with the problem. The problem, though, was that we created them without a lot of education, and a lot of the sites failed miserably. So very slowly but surely, we got the infrastructure we have now that has solved the problem. But that just shows you that without education and oversight, even the best people can make big mistakes. And this farm thought they were doing a great job, and they just weren't. So that's really why we're here, to be the fly in your ointment, but be the wind beneath your wings.
They want you to be composters, not decomposers.
Right. Help you glide along.
base to put that material on.
And that actually leads us to the last presentation.
Yeah.
Mark Hendrick is going to talk about compost management plans. And without further ado, Mark Hendrick, Department of Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry.
I was going to say good morning, but it's too late for that. So,
Yes, sir.
if anybody's really hungry, there's still some goodies over there, I see, so. So I'm going to talk a little bit about farm compost management plans, what they're all about, and why they can be a good mechanism for utilizing some of these materials we've been talking about today, particularly food products. So composting is certainly not a new concept, been around for a long time. And planning ahead, the concept of planning ahead is certainly not new, at least for most of us. A few people don't plan ahead, well, we know what happens to them, or what happens to the projects that they undertake. Management plans, certainly not a new concept, so same thing. Important to have a good plan before you go into something, otherwise it's probably not going to work very well. So, in the past, people would come up with an idea for a project. They think, well, I guess I want to do this. I want to start this business, or I want to do that. And they have this few ideas in their head, and maybe that gels and maybe it doesn't. But that kind of thing really doesn't work anymore. You really got to have a written plan, a written business plan. And why do we need that? Well, most people that's going to start a business or an operation need to get some financing. You're gonna get it from a bank, then you get it from some other organization that provides them some money, loan or a grant. And if they don't have a really good plan that's all set out in black and white, they're probably not gonna get too much money up front. Having that business plan also suggests that they're gonna maybe have some long-term survival for that business rather than it being here today and gone tomorrow. So planning ahead, well, it minimizes risks. Minimizes risks of what? Well, risk of failure usually. We don't want failure. So a little bit of history. The Maine Nutrient Management Program was started back around 1998, and out of that program came a requirement for the development of nutrient management plans by certain farmers who met certain requirements. So this was used as a method of planning ahead to minimize risk, to minimize environmental risk, to minimize economic risk to the farming operation. When compost management plans have come along, then they essentially look at the same kinds of strategies and goals as those nutrient management plans do. So DEP and the Department of Ag have collaborated for a long time on the various matters, and we particularly collaborate on composting and compost management plan development. So in 2007 or so, we developed a memorandum of understanding between the two departments how we would work together for trying to regulate these farm compost management plans. Now, as a result of the Department of Agriculture being involved with the development and implementation of these plans, it made farmers more readily amenable to getting more into composting, because they had a lot of materials to compost. People had materials they were bringing in, food waste, that kind of thing. It was kind of a thing that would enhance the farm's bottom line. It was an economic issue for them. So, but if DEP was involved, you know, farmers are a little nervous about having DEP come on their properties, because, you know, if they come in here and I'm being regulated by them, they're definitely going to find something wrong here, and I'm going to be in trouble. But they feel the Department of Agriculture, look at Mike smiling again, you know, but we've got these white hat guys with some black hat guys, and some of them well, Mike's certainly a white hat guy, and Mark's a white hat guy, and most of those guys are pretty good, and gals in DEP, they're all right, but once in a while you're going to feel that, you know, this being recorded, better be careful with this. So anyway, this collaboration of us working together certainly helps farmers be, you know, more receptive to the developing compost management plan. So anyway, so okay, you've already heard this, you've seen this figure all day today, 40% of food's wasted. You know, that's one of the disadvantages or advantages of being the last speaker, is that most of the previous speakers have already said everything you were going to say. But anyway, so there's no problem with reiterating that. You know, so much food is going to landfill. We don't want that. We've got a lot of carbon-based materials that should be recycled. Let's see. So we all know this. The new nationwide emphasis on recycling, putting these waste products or residuals to some good use, rather than having going to the landfill, going to the ocean. We know all about that problem. That private dump out back, there used to be a lot of them. I know there's still some of them out there. We all know that. What's the things going into? So we've got food products, seafood processing materials, and usually I say, you wouldn't believe how many lobster shells are going to various composting facilities to be composted. And it's still happening, crab shells, that type of thing. But some of those lobster shells are going to be repurposed now. It's one of the largest producers of lobster that's going to be utilizing their own shells. They're going to be grinding them up, grinding them out, using that chitin for some personal care products now. So that's a good thing, because it's utilizing that material, putting it to a higher use, rather than just being composted. It's a value-added product. So that's what we like to see. So yard waste, animal manures and beddings. Bedded horse manure is one of the best feedstocks we can use for composting materials. Mark usually calls it jet fuel, which is the case. It's got all the proper characteristics that we want to see in a composting material. It's got the right skin ratio, moisture is good, good porosity usually, depending on what it is, a whole bunch of other things. And believe it or not, we even compost animal carcasses now. A lot of dairy farms and beef farms have been composting the routine mortalities for quite a while now. It works very well. They end up with a product that can be utilized on the farm. It doesn't tie up their site forever. If you bury, the site is tied up, you've got potential environmental problems. Maine has fractured bedrock. Maine has high seasonal water tables, which is not good, which can create environmental issues. So we don't like burial. There are other methods besides compost that can be used, but most of them don't work well. They're very expensive. The throughput is too slow. So composting seems to work very well. And you've probably heard about the avian influenza situation. Composting has been used, mostly been used for handling those birds that need to be composted. It's being done all over the country. Everybody is composting those birds and doing other things, but most of them are being composted, and so they end up with a material that can be utilized on farms afterwards. So let's see, so what are we going to do? We're going to compost. Before we figure that out, if we have it by now, we're in big trouble here. So it usually utilizes those materials. We end up with a relatively stable, useful product. We don't have offensive odors if things are being done correctly. Reduces environmental impacts, reduces greenhouse gases. And we know when you compost, people say, well, yeah, you get carbon dioxide. Well, that's true. But if those materials were going to be to go to the landfill, then you're more than likely going to get a lot more methane, which is 25 to 30% greater greenhouse warming potential than carbon dioxide, or in some cases, utilizing manures, you might have nitrous oxide, which is about 300 times the greenhouse warming potential of carbon dioxide. I'm not going to mention that, but I'm saying it again. So now we're down to compost management plans, really. So what are they? What good are they? What value are they to the farmer? Well, again, as I said, there's not a new concept. There's been about 60 more of them developed in this state so far. And this process kind of started with Dr. Bill Seekins, who worked for the Department of Agriculture for over 30 years. And he's a real composting guru. He's known all over the world for projects that he's done. All of us have worked with him for a long time now. And he developed a template that we can use for developing those plans. And it has a number of options on it that can be utilized, and we use that all the time. So how do we develop one of these plans? Well, what usually happens is farmer will call the department, they'll call me, they'll call Mark, and we will go out there and look at the situation. We'll usually go out on the land and see what the lay of the land is to try to find a good site. What are the environmental potential environmental impacts? How close is that site to a well, to a neighbor's property line, to rivers and brooks, all those kinds of things. We'll look at that. What are the soil types? And if everything looks fine, then we'll usually go in and sit down with that person for usually at least a couple hours, and we'll take that template, and there are a lot of options on there, and we'll take those options that seem to fit that farm, because it's very site-specific. That plan has to fit that farm exactly, otherwise there's no point in doing it. We don't take a one-size-fits-all approach. We want it to accurately reflect what's really going on that composting operation. And they have to reflect current best management practices, which is for me now to get a drink. Okay. So again, they have to be flexible. They can be modified with time. They're not totally cut and sewn. So what's in them? We're going to have information in that plan about how that facility should be designed, how those materials are going to be stored and managed, proper recipe development. That's a really important thing. If the recipe isn't correct, then it's not going to work. You're going to have odors. You're not going to end up with a good product. There's going to be all types of problems. So we help them develop that recipe, which is determined by the types of feedstocks that they're going to be composting. And of course, that recipe is going to vary with those feedstocks. So we will often give them 2, 3, 4, even 5 or 6 different recipes, depending on what they have at the present time, or what they think they're probably going to have down the road. So we're going to talk about proper pile management and how to handle those materials. Now, it turns out that anybody can compost in a 30-day period without a DEP permit or a compost management plan. They can do 10 yards of leaf and vegetable material, 5 yards of food waste, 5 yards of fish residuals, so they don't need anything, they can just do that, no license. They can also compost domestic animal and poultry carcasses from routine mortalities. And they can even compost up to 10,000 cubic yards of animal manure annually. So, back in 2011 or so, some farmers petitioned DEP to change their rules because they wanted to be able to compost more materials than they were allowed to at the time. It used to be a limit of 30 yards in a 30-day period. That wasn't enough because they wanted to have a bigger revenue stream to the farm. They had more materials that could be composted, they wanted to be able to do that. So, it turned out that this rule change allowed composting of larger volumes, particularly those type 1 materials, by an agricultural composting operation, or farm composting operation, if you want to call it, without a DEP permit if they have the compost management plan. So again, we've got Department of Agriculture involved here, and DEP isn't necessarily going to be the regulator. So farmers like that. So, of course, there's exemptions to everything, and so it turns out that a farm may compost up to 60 yards of these type 1 B and C residuals in a 30-day period without that license if they have that compost management plan. And also, they compost any volume of those residuals, provided they use at least 70% of that material on their own farm within 2 years. Also, they can compost leaves as an amendment to manure, they have that plan, and they can compost offal. So those are just a reiteration of what I just said, and in the interest of time, I won't say it again. So what else is in that plan? Certainly it's going to be a description of the operation. There's going to be diagrams of how the windrows will be laid out, where they will be. There'll be some Google Earth photos of the site, and there will be listings of the types of ingredients, manure, food scraps, seafood scraps, wood chips, hot sludge compost. Well, that used to be a kind of a go-to for this state and other places if we had a huge catastrophic animal loss, whether it be poultry or whatever it may be, beef cattle, dairy cattle. Well, you know what's happened to hot sludge compost now? There's a sort of thing called PFAS that's reared its ugly head lately. And it turns out that much, if not all of that material has PFAS in it, so we're not going to be using it for this purpose anymore, unfortunately. So it's also, the plan's also going to have how the ingredients are received, describing pre-mixing that's done, if material comes in, and it can be mixed like a particularly digestible material that Max was talking about this morning. You got to mix that with some carbon material that may not go right into your windrow immediately, but at least it'll be pre-mixed. We'll describe that. And again, the recipes, we talked about the recipes. Let's see. We want to make sure they have enough equipment to use, tractors with loaders, skid steers, maybe even a compost turner, trucks, dump trucks. We want to make sure they got the equipment that they need for properly doing the job. Pile construction techniques we'll be talking about, turning aeration frequencies, moisture control, temperature monitoring. Well, we want them to have some compost thermometers because monitoring that temperature of those piles is the best diagnostic type of thing that we can have that informs us how well that pile is operating. So if it's not operating right, the temperature is going to tell us, usually going to tell us that something is wrong. The pile's too wet, it's too dry, it's not mixed properly, it's not porous enough, it's not getting enough oxygen. There's all kinds of factors that those thermometers, those temperatures can tell us. So that's a really important thing that we want them to be looking for. We've already been about this, odor control, vector control, dust control, stormwater, leachate control. There shouldn't be a lot of leachate if the piles are built correctly. You shouldn't be having a lot of leachate. There will be some stormwater runoff potentially because it does rain and snow. Biosecurity, we want to make sure that the finished product doesn't get contaminated by the raw materials that are coming in. We want a separation there. If the farm is going to be sampling selling that material to the public. We want them to be testing it at least once a year. So, in 2018, we updated the nutrient management rules, and I included in those rules a section on compost management plan development because we didn't really have anything prior at that time. So it was kind of a, I don't want to use the term free-for-all, but that's sort of what it was, up to a point. So, there's a term of certification is 5 years. That is for 5 years as long as the farmer is following the requirements of that plan. And the requirements for people writing those compost management plans, but they're not terribly stringent. Farmer can write his or her plan if he wants. We can assist. Usually Mark and I are writing those plans. But the plan, whoever writes it, the plan has to be approved by the department, by me usually. So if I write the plan, it usually gets approved. And they have to conform us with the Department of Chapter 211 carcass disposal rules. And if you want some nice evening reading, you know, you're having trouble getting to sleep, we have these, they're online, I have copies of them. And also, being compliant with best management practice, the manual that Bill Seekins wrote some time ago. There's all kinds of information in there on developing compost management plans. It's also online, and I can send you a copy if you like. So, this is a prettier example of one than what I had there. But, so again, we want to plan ahead. We want to plan ahead to minimize risk and to avoid what we want to avoid by planning ahead. It's too close to lunch, I guess. Failure. We don't want to have failure. We want everything to go well. So, compost management plants have been a good thing. A lot of farmers are using them. We're developing more and more of them all the time. In fact, I had 2 emails in the last hour about plans that are in development. So there are good mechanisms trying to utilize some of these materials that are available. So I know it's lunchtime, and I really did try to rush through that. So thank you all very much. If you have any questions. Yes, sir.
Yeah, what about PFAS? Number one, what's the state of DEP doing in removing PFAS that is already in the ground or landfills? And number two, how are you requiring people to deal with PFAS, maybe in keeping it out of the waste stream completely? Are there any rules coming down to eliminate the use of PFAS in materials?
Totally. People are no longer allowed to spread sludge. So the PFAS in sludge, then that's sort of been eliminated. As far as materials, it's everywhere. It's in the pizza box. It's in the McDonald's burger wrap. It's in your clothing. I'm sure it's in these chassis. Anywhere you want a barrier between a water barrier or a fat barrier, that's where it is. It's everywhere. So the federal government is now looking at this more and more to try to determine what exactly they're going to regulate. There's at least 2 of them now that are talking about regulating right off. There's some, I think there's a Federal Register rule that is about to be in progress very soon on at least 2 of the worst ones. There's thousands of them. So that's, you know.
So the state's not doing any looking into regulation. You're relying on the federal government
Well,
to
no,
come down with
the state is too. Yeah, we developed, the spreading thing, the state developed those rules for, yeah. But we've got a big, huge cadre of people working on this, going out to the farms and doing soil sampling. Hundreds of, I don't know what it's up to, hundreds of homes now have water filtration systems to take the PFAS out. What was that? That's the first question. What was the first one?
So what the department has done, without getting into more detail than necessary, is they identified all the sites where sludge and septic has been spread over the years throughout the whole state of Maine. They developed a tier system, tier 1, 2, and 3, of the sites that receive the most sludge And they went and sampled tier 1, and they're sampling tier 2, and they're looking at soils first, and then they're looking at water. And the sites that had high PFAS numbers in their water, they're then looking at residents within a half a mile, within a mile, and looking at testing their wells. And the first place that has received the most attention is Fairfield, Maine, where the site received a lot of sludge over the years from a wastewater treatment plant that had some significant PFAS input into their treatment plant. And as a result, a bunch of those homes were put on treatment systems. And those treatment systems, they're carbon filters, so they're called granulated activation carbon, actuated carbon. And basically the way that it works is every 6 months, those filters have to be changed. So the department is working with the citizens, they're testing, after they put the system in, they're testing the water before, during, and after to make sure the systems are working. And then they go back and they're helping to replace the filters. The town of Fairfield also, because of the extent of the PFAS controversy, Erin Brockovich has come in, and she has created quite a stir there to the point where the town of Fairfield is actually considering extending public water to all the affected homes. And that's a huge controversy because of the amount of money that it'll cost. Even though they have federally matching funds to make it worth their while to do it, there are people that are just very upset that it's going to raise taxes. So right now, we're still in the investigation, treatment phase of everything. So that's really where DEP is focusing all of its efforts.
So is there any progress on how to remove PFAS from the environment? Is only carbon collection and then disposal the only method now?
No, there are several companies that are working on PFAS destruction technologies. The University of Maine is putting in a PFAS testing laboratory, and there are several professors are looking at PFAS destruction as well. So the jury's out on what may work, but they have found that extremely high temperatures, thermal destruction will work, but extremely high temperatures. So that's pretty much all that I know about it.
It's a very tough molecule, it doesn't not break down easily, it's what they call them forever, what they call them forever chemicals. I was going to say something else, oh, I know what it's does. The Department of Ag has a website, on their website has a big section on PFAS stuff that you might find of interest. Yes, ma'am.
I was just curious, so if a farmer brings this management plan to you, obviously it takes some money to get going. Are there grants or incentives for farmers to initiate this?
Well, we develop those plans for them. They don't really need a grant to do that. We do it right now.
I mean like the equipment to set it up and things like that.
Yeah, Natural Resources Conservation Service, you've probably heard of them. They deal with all kinds of environmental issues on farms, and they can fund composting pads, sometimes some equipment, all kinds of land practices that can help with that sort of thing. So that is an opportunity there. And it's cost shared. It's usually about 75% of it will be cost shared, but they don't use that term anymore. It doesn't matter. And usually the farmer can do his or her own work on it, and that can be, called in kind, so they'll end up often not having to put a lot of their own money into it.
Gotcha.
We've also given $40,000 grants to several farmers through the Waste Diversion Grant Program, working with municipalities. So if you were to have a situation where you had a farm in this area, let's say that you decide to do, and I'm not trying to push anybody in any direction, but let's say Kennebunk, and Arundel decide to get together, and they want to compost at this farm. That farm could get a compost management plan and apply for a DEP waste diversion grant during one of our cycles when the RFP is released, and they could ask for $40,000 for infrastructure. And just like that site in Farmington where they got the $25,000 to build it, that's something they could ask for. And the idea would be, if we build this site, we're going to remove significant organics from these three communities that would be a very winning kind of program.
Yep, that's my ultimate goal.
Yeah, cool.
And we also have a nutrient management loan program that could cover some of those things, but again, it's a loan program, not a grant, so most people want to go where they can get a grant, it doesn't have to be paid back, so.
And just to tell you, well, I can't say anymore, I'm sorry. I was gonna tell you some information from the current cycle, but I can't. But at the end, just wait until we report out, and then you'll know what I was gonna say.
Okay.
I was gonna say it.
Yeah.
That's the part about the Waste Diversion grant that's been the hardest for me, because I'm a people person and I like to help people, but once I submit an RFP, I can't talk to anybody. They have 2 weeks to submit me questions in writing that have to be published on the purchaser's website. After that, I cannot have any discussions until I issue the awards letters.
And he likes to talk.
And it's horrible, because people will call me and just want to ask me, and I can't. And it's terrible, so. But those are the rules.
Any other questions?
I want to thank you all for coming. I mean, this has made
Thank
it
you.
worth our while, and, you know, these last two have been the best attended, and that's awesome. So, give yourself a round of applause.